So for those who are watching the recording right now, I'm just going to wait for people to come into the stream. Hello, everyone. I'm just waiting for a few more people to come in. I don't know how long we're going to go tonight. But just concluded the debate with Shabir on who the real Jesus was. I feel very good about it. I think Shabir was very cordial. It was a productive engagement. I think that if I were to, I don't know if this is bad form or whatever, to like do one's, who won thing after the debate, but I think the fundamental argument that Shabir made for trusting the Quran's view of Jesus was that on numerical features. And I think by his final statement, he had really completely dropped that argument because, and this is fine. I mean, if you haven't encountered something before, obviously, it's just a matter of integrity to not pretend like one knows the response to it. But because just he hadn't encountered the biblical gematria argument. But I think that the real point here about the historical Jesus is that, with all respect to Shabir knows that on historical grounds, the Islamic view is at a distinct disadvantage. On historical grounds, the Quran's take on Jesus seems to reflect a 7th century context. It seems to reflect the idea of Jesus someone in the Arabian Peninsula would have from contact with Judaism and Christianity. And so what he fundamentally does is he will look at arguments for the Quran's inspiration in general and use that as an argument for saying, well, if we can trust its divine origin in general, we can also trust its view on Jesus. And I think what I would say to that is, number one, on the numerical point, the numerical stuff is very difficult for anybody to assess in terms of its epistemic value in demonstrating the divine origin of the Quran. Because as I argued in the debate, and I think this is a really important point, which perhaps other Christian debaters haven't really gone after so much because they aren't fans of the numerical stuff, though I love it in Scripture. The fundamental point is that the numerical features are not there to demonstrate the divine origin of the text in question. That's not what they're doing there. Numerical features are there to give substance to that which the text is communicating. Numerical features are there to underscore the points that are being made in the biblical or in the Quranic text. And the thing is, with respect to the Quran, and this was the argument that I made, Shabir presented various figures on how probable it would be that these numerical features would appear in the Quran. I didn't make this first point in the debate, but the problem is that any arrangement of words is in itself improbable, right? So the question is it both complex and specified? That's kind of the intelligent design argument. But in order to argue for its being specified, you need to have a pre-existing reason why one would expect this arrangement or this structure and not another structure. So if I take any word or any feature of the Quran, it probably is not going to be part of a numerical composition. The numerical compositions that are cited by Shabir are cited because those are the specific words that can be presented in that way. And while I don't think that it's there to the degree that he suggests it's there probably are some numerical features in the Quran. I mean, it's a literary strategy that is not something which is invented by modern scholars. ancient writers talk about using numbers as literary devices. And so we have no reason to think that using numbers as literary devices is ipso facto improbable. The problem is that it just really doesn't demonstrate what Shabir wanted to demonstrate, which is that the Quran is of divine origin. Therefore, since it's of divine origin, it overrules all of the arguments historically for the biblical portrait of Jesus. I think that when you look at what was discussed as to the actual history itself, Shabir, very intelligent guy, very cordial gentleman. On a personal level, I think he's a likable guy. But I think he really avoided the historical argument entirely, which is that how does one explain why the Gospels have the features that they have, if in fact they are written by non-eyewitnesses? And the argument was, well, most scholars don't think they were written by eyewitnesses. Well, most scholars don't think that the Quran is the word of God. And that was, I really was just said what I think, which is that I don't give a, I don't care what most scholars think. I really don't. I don't. It's not just that it doesn't have 100% correlation with what the truth of the matter is. It's that I am not convinced that it has any correlation at all with what the truth of the matter is. And if one wants to make an argument on the basis of a scholarly consensus, that's okay, but you actually have to give it in two premises. You have to argue, number one, most scholars believe X, and number two, what most scholars believe gives us epistemic warrant in thinking that X is the truth. And I don't think that that was done. And the arguments as to the actual historical content of the Gospels were effectively ignored. It was said, well, the Gospels, they use they may use realistic features, but that doesn't prove that they're history. The question is simply, well, how precisely did the gospel authors get access to such an accurate proportion of names when, number one, it is a subtle feature of the text, which is only identifiable because of the modern systematization and collation of texts from antiquity. And number two, given that it demonstrates the author to have had access to reliable information, what warrant do we have in thinking that the other parts aren't reliable? So it's effectively the argument that, well, if I can't demonstrate a specific feature to be historical, well, then the null hypothesis is just 50-50. Whereas I think if we can demonstrate the Gospels to have to be reliable on grounds A, B, C, and D, well, then we have grounds to give them the benefit of the doubt in their other features where we don't have one reason or another to think either way. So I want to thank everyone for those who came to the debate. I really enjoyed it. I'm hoping that I can engage Shabir more. We're going to be keeping in contact over email. This is not, what I'm about to say is not a challenge. Okay, I don't really like to operate that way. It's just a matter of personal preference. But I hope that maybe we could debate specifically on the divinity of Jesus at some point in the future. And I hope that this will be a kind of door to engage with other Islamic apologists. So thank you so much for coming. I'll be here for, I think, quite some time. Also, I didn't mention this because I didn't want to make it seem as if I thought what most scholars believed actually mattered in itself, but I don't think that he's correct in terms of what he said N.T. Wright believes about the authorship of the Gospel of John. I have an introduction to the New Testament written by N.T. Wright and Michael Bird, and what he says is that I think he doesn't take a view as to whether it was written by John the Presbyter or John the son of Zebedee. I think that John the Presbyter is John the son of Zebedee. There's simply no reason from the secondary source or the primary sources that we have to think that it's anyone else. Papias gives two lists of various people, and he names John twice, but point is John fits into both of the lists that he is presenting. It doesn't mean that they're two distinct Johns. The only reason that the idea of two distinct Johns has emerged is because Eusebius didn't like the apocalypse, and so he wanted the apocalypse to be attributed to someone other than the apostles, so that he didn't have to take it seriously. Apart from Eusebius, the evidence is very strong that it was John the son of Zebedee who wrote the gospel. And in fact, Eusebius thought that John the son of Zebedee wrote the gospel, right? All right, but not the apocalypse. Yeah. So your thoughts on the debate would be appreciated. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pin one of my chats. I'm going to say tonight, I'm going to guarantee, I haven't been on a live stream in quite some time, but I'm going to guarantee responses to all super chats. As you know, no matter how long it goes, I guarantee responses to every single super chat. And I mean it. We've done 9 hours before. And I'm willing to go 9 hours tonight. Shabir, I sent Shabir the link to this live stream. He said he may well make an appearance. If and I want to say, if Shabir does make an appearance, I would ask everyone to please be cordial to him. I'm not saying, oh, people here aren't cordial, but please do behave as gentlemen, because yeah. So yeah, and I'm going to pin that chat. And a super chat is where you donate like some 1, 5, 10, 20. You can donate whatever you want. You give a little bit of money together with a chat, and I guarantee an answer to those specific questions. Okay, so, and it can be on anything. It doesn't need to be on the doesn't need to be on the subject of the debate. And Emperor Maximilian, I agree. I think Shabir is the most astute Islamic apologist. And I think the problem is simply that Islam is, to be perfectly honest with you, is a very difficult tradition to defend. I think that when you look at the Quran, the kind of image that it has of Christianity and Judaism reflects, in my opinion, a very superficial knowledge of what Christianity and Judaism is all about. In other words, it mentions the names of various prophets that are sent to the Israelites. It mentions the name of Jesus, but it doesn't seem to have an understanding of why Israel is the chosen nation, why Israel is distinct or consecrated from the other nations, what God was trying to do through Israel, how God was using Israel as a distinct chosen nation to bless all the nations of the earth, or why the Messianic king had the specific a vocation that he did. I wish I could have said more about the Messianic thing during the discussion. I know it's just the nature of the case that, Shabir, most of the viewers are probably Christian, so Shabir is going to get more questions than I did. I wish I could have said more on the biblical portrait of Jesus as Messiah. I thought about integrating something like that into my opening presentation on why the Jesus of the Gospels makes sense of the Messianic portrait of the Old Testament, but I just didn't have the time to do so. Here, actually, I'm gonna guaranteeing answers. Super chat is, so if you look at the chat box, you will see next to the smiley face where you put an emoji, super chat is the $sign there. You can donate whatever you'd like, whether you donate $1 or $100. I guarantee an answer to your question if you super chat with it. By the way, I was Shabir suggesting that it was possible that Jesus was not born of a virgin? I was confused about that. What do you mean pay with cash? I know Shabir had been controversial among some Islamic circles. Some people have suggested to me that, oh, don't debate Shabir, debate someone who isn't so controversial among Muslims. The reason I think it's actually a good thing to debate someone who's more controversial is because I think that Muslims who are fans of Shabir are probably Muslims who aren't satisfied with the standard explanations as to this or that aspect of their tradition. All right, so they're probably Muslims who are willing to push the boundaries of what it means to be Muslim in order to retain Muslim faith. And that those individuals, I think, are actually, I don't want to sound crude, but more ripe for conversion to Christianity. I think those people might be more flexible than those who are dissatisfied with the pat answers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my dog. My brother has very graciously watched him. He was going to whine during my debate. Puggy is doing well. I had him neutered a week ago. So, yeah, you guys will be able to say hello to the pug, and see you in a few moments. Hey, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so the thing with super chats, oh, yeah, hold on. The thing with super chats is that even though they kind of they will go past the scroll point here, I have a separate page where I can see all my super chats, so that doesn't actually matter. I can see all of your super chats even if you can't see them. So. Let's see. Okay. Okay, I'm going to what I can do is I'm going to copy paste the links to some of the Discord servers. Yeah, you can't. Puggy is actually right here. I'll show you to him in a few moments. I want to give him space on the bed so that he can sleep. So let's see. Okay. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh wait. Sorry, guys. Hello, Pug. Yeah, so I will get to every single super chat tonight. Okay. Hello, Bug. Yeah, so hold on. Hello, Puggy. All right. Okay, I will show you Puggy. Okay, hold on, Pug. Okay. Hello, Bug. Okay. Puggy, come here. So this is Puggy. As you can probably tell, I'm a dog person. I always loved dogs. Grew up with dogs. And this little guy, I found. So the story is, I like to walk when I do prayers with people. I just find it much easier to do it when I walk. So I was planning on doing at 9 p.m. a canon with a gentleman to one's guardian angel, which I think is thematically appropriate. And I went outside, and this lady was walking her dog. She had several French bulldogs, and this little guy was just running along beside her. And she said, "Is this your dog?" And I said, "No, it's not my dog. I'd assumed that he was one of he's not a pug. He's a French bulldog." Mostly French bulldog. But thing is, I've never heard of French bulldogs before. So, and he had a pug face. So, I just didn't know what to call him. So I was calling him Puggy as a nickname. I didn't want to name him until I knew I'd be able to keep him. So I found this little guy. I picked him up. I carried him all over the neighborhood. I was yelling around, seeing if anyone had lost their dog. I was sure that he was a house dog, that someone was missing him. So I put up an ad. I put up an ad that, found this dog. It was shared hundreds of times online. I called the vet. I called the animal shelter. They put up stuff. And honestly, it was a little bit of a stressful week because, by the end of the first day, I love this little guy. And I was really kind of stressed out and anxious that I was going to get a phone call that, oh, you found my dog, and I'd have to give him up. And just legally, he wouldn't be legally mine until I think it would be 7 days. And, you have to notify the shelter, which I did. So I did everything legally. But it was stressful, especially when I woke up. I'd be really worried that I was going to have a missed call. And I'd check my voicemail. Oh, you found my dog. And I'd have to say goodbye, but never came. And so he is now my dog. And his name is Puggy. And he's a sweetheart. He's probably the least aggressive dog I've ever met. He's never shown a hint of aggression. Even when I give him cookies, he doesn't. Gabriella, you know what? That's not very nice, but I will take it as a joke. Even when I give him cookies, he very slowly grabs it so that he doesn't put his teeth on my hand. So he's a real sweetheart. So I'll give him. And he was just neutered. So that was also a little stressful. Okay. I'm about to get to your guys' super chats. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm gonna post this on Facebook. Shoot, what the heck? Oh wait, didn't I? Oh, okay, never mind. I thought I just accidentally closed down my thing. I didn't. Okay. Okay. So someone in one of my friends has suggested that I debate Richard Carrier or an atheist. 1 second here. It's actually Richard Carrier, an atheist, on the histories of the Gospels, which I think is a good idea. So we'll see if that happens. I want to thank everybody for your prayers. I am incredibly appreciative of that. I really believe that, prayers are essential. Someone asked me if I was using sign language. No, I'm not using sign language. It's just, it's just the way I talk. I use my hands. Someone on Discord said, does Cobain have autism or ADHD because of the hand thing? I mean, look, no offense or disrespect to people who have Asperger's or some kind of autism, but I've always thought that hand motions was considered a positive in engagement, but whether it's positive or negative, it's just how I talk. It's both a way of accentuating certain points one wants to make, but also it helps me because every word that we use, every concept that we have, it has some kind of correlation with space, right? If I say X is far from Y, when I move my hand out like this, it's not something that I think about. It's just something that I do because it's a way of giving emphasis, and it's a way of putting one's energy into the whole line of thought, right? So when I say into, hands go like this. Why? Because it's a motion into the air. It's just something that is natural, and it's I've always been very exuberant, right? So my parents would call it when I was a kid exploding. Most idiosyncrasies that you have if you're a kid, you can find some parallel. Like people on Reddit will say, "Oh yeah, I did that too." I've never found anyone who did this kind of thing. I did this kind of thing. But what I would do is, I think the dog is. What I would do is I would go like this if I was in some kind of. I was trying to create a story in my mind. I go like this, and it would help. I don't know why, it just was. So there you go. Okay, now Bug, come on. He's trying to eat something all night. So I have my camera like taped onto my laptop, but my laptop isn't what I'm using right now. But still, I don't want the dog to like chew something on my laptop for some reason. He's doing that. Okay. Honestly, I think Reddit is great. I love Reddit. The reason I love Reddit is because you get a lot of threads there which allow you to see into other people's world. And it can be very, very insightful as to how other people experience reality, right? So I know empathy is kind of a buzzword. Empathy is not a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. It can lead you to do terrible things. It can lead you to do good things. But the Old Testament says, "Thine eye shall not pity," and people go, "Whoa, that's kind of scary." Thine eye shall not pity, but pity can be used as a weapon, right? A psychopath can play on your emotions. If you have someone who murders children, thine eye shall not pity. Don't be manipulated. Don't let emotion lead you to circumvent justice. So actually, C.S. Lewis has a great bit on this in Great Divorce, on how pity is used as a weapon. People will use it to get you to feel sorry for them. And it's not a Machiavellian move in general. It's just something people do. But empathy, whether it's intellectual or emotional, intellectual empathy is understanding how another person can think the way that they do. And I found if you want to get a person to listen to you who wouldn't otherwise listen to you, demonstrate that you understand what it feels like to be persuaded by their position. If I'm in an engagement with a naturalist, I will find that their ears will open right up if you can demonstrate that you know exactly what seems to them so persuasive about naturalism. And you can articulate it in a way that maybe they themselves haven't articulated explicitly, but they say, that's exactly why I feel like naturalism is so intuitive. If you can demonstrate that you understand that, they will listen to you with a much higher degree of probability, because what it demonstrates is you know why they're convinced and you disagree still. Okay? Sympathy is a choice, right? So you sympathize, you can empathize, you don't sympathize, you can sympathize, but not empathize. So, sorry guys, Lindsay Disney says, I used to be an atheist, and I have found it's really interesting because I have been on YouTube for a long time. I've been on YouTube since 2007. Okay, so I got on YouTube January 6, 2007, when I was 13 years old. I got on YouTube to debate creationists. I was a theistic evolutionist at that point. As most of you guys know, I'm not a theistic evolutionist any longer. Got on YouTube to debate creationists, and it changed my life. It changed everything. I have no idea what path my life would have taken if I hadn't made that video that day. But it's really interesting, having known the religious debate community then and knowing it now, seeing how much things have changed, seeing how many atheists have come around to see the truth of Christianity. People talk about the rise of the nuns, quote unquote. I actually think we can get an illusory picture of the way that things are when we say, oh, secularism is spreading, right? Christianity is on the decline. Because I actually think it's a good thing, because what people who identify as nuns, people who say, oh, I'm an atheist, most of them were not raised to be religious in a serious sense, okay? Most of them were raised very nominally religious and have come to understand that they don't actually believe, okay? It was never taken very seriously. It is much better to engage with a person who understands that they do not believe in Jesus than it is to engage with a person who thinks that they believe in Jesus. And I'm just talking on kind of a propositional factual sense. I'm not talking about, oh, you're not a real believer, but, a person who thinks that they believe in Jesus, but really they don't. Okay, that's a much harder person to engage with. If you get a person who knows they disagree with you, then you can have a discussion. That's why I find with Muslims, there's a lot more. It's easier to engage with a Muslim, a conservative Muslim, than it is to engage with a kind of milquetoast generic secularist, because you have common ground, and your common ground is we both know that we think the other one is wrong about serious things. We both know that these are important issues, so we can have a discussion about that. When you're engaging a person who says, we're both right, or you have your truth, I have my truth. I used to think that like that kind of thing only existed in the evangelical imagination, that nobody actually said that. Some people actually do say we each have our own truth. So yeah. Thomas Bergman, I would love to answer that question. I will answer that question. If you could super chat it, I would really appreciate it, but I understand if you don't. What is the best source for understanding the historical epidemic genealogy in the age of Earth from biblical perspective? James B. Jordan, his series on biblical chronology. You can get it on wordmp3.com. It's excellent. About 600 pages. Goes in detail through every piece of chronological information in the scriptures. The thing is, chronology is very important to the Bible. The Bible takes it very seriously because God takes it very seriously. Go to the Bible, look at how the angels, when you're building a sanctuary, they will measure out the dimensions of the sanctuary. It'll be this many, it'll be this width and this height. Paul in the letter to the Ephesians, he says, that we might know the height and width and length and depth. He's alluding to Zechariah, where Zechariah is prophesying the Messianic temple where the angels measure out the sanctuary. Because what it means is that since the whole creation is a sanctuary, everything that is in the world, from its great features to its tiny details, has a very precise purpose, which is totally understood to God. And space and time are correlative with each other. So certain prepositions like before. Before has both a spatial referent and a temporal referent. You can be before someone, you're standing in front of them, or you can be before temporally. This happens before this. It happens in the preceding moment. That something is both a spatial and a temporal referent is a consistent feature across language families, and it's because there is a connection between the two. That modern physics has elucidated the nature of that connection simply underscores the basic insight that human beings have had about reality since day one, which I think comes in part from the mind of God. Now, if you look at the chronology of the Bible, you will find that chronological information is presented at key points in the biblical history relative to the building of the temple. So, Adam to Abraham. These are the generations of Adam. Well, that comes right after Seth has a son, and it says, in those days men began to call upon the name of the Lord. You call upon the name of the Lord at an altar. This is about the sanctuary. This is about the priestly line. Then you've got Shem, Genesis 11, to Abraham. That gives you the second bit of chronological information. Genesis 5 and 11 are not like other genealogies, okay? They're meant to give you a chronology because they provide the age of the father at the birth of his son. Okay, that is unique. You don't have other genealogies giving you the age of the father at the birth of the son. Then Genesis chapter 11 tells us Shem had his son, Arphaxad, 2 years after the flood. Genesis 12 tells us Abraham was 75 years old when he came into the land. That gives us an age for Terah, 130 years old. That allows us to bridge the chronological gap. Exodus chapter 12, 430 years from Abraham's descent into Egypt, as Galatians says, to the Exodus. The Exodus came for the purpose of building the sanctuary. Exodus 40, God's glory comes, fills the sanctuary. And then in the book of Kings, the chronological information is given with respect to the temple, right? So it's 480 years from the Exodus to the temple. Then the book of Daniel does a really cool thing. The book of Daniel gives you the final bit of chronological information in advance. So it's a prophetic chronology. It gives you the chronology from the decree of Cyrus down to the coming of the Messiah. 27 AD, beginning of the 70th week, 33 AD, end of the 70th week, in the midst of the 70th week, sacrifice and tribute is made to cease. Sacrifice and tribute are two distinct kinds of sacrifices. Okay? Two distinct kinds of Oh, that question you just asked about the minor storm deity, I'm very excited to answer that. Okay? It's great. It's a great question. I will get to all of them. I promise. Daniel chapter 9 gives us 490 years, decree of Cyrus, coming of Jesus, midst of the 70th week, in the middle of it, 30 AD, sacrifice and tribute ceases. Sacrifice is Leviticus 3, tribute is Leviticus 2. The tribute offering is bread and wine. Wine is added when you come into the land. And sacrifice, that's the peace offering. Whenever you see the English word sacrifice, it's talking generally about Leviticus 3, the peace offering, which is where Israel's priests eat the same food that God does. Okay, so you're sitting down, you're having a meal with God. What happens in the middle of the 70th week? Jesus is crucified, he's resurrected, he ascends into heaven, he anoints the heavenly sanctuary, and he institutes the Eucharist. Jesus says, do this in my memorial. Amanuensis. Anamnesis, I think is how you pronounce it in Greek. Do this as my memorial. Well, that comes from Leviticus 2, where the tribute offering, bread and wine, is an offering of remembrance. Why? Because in the tribute offering, an Israelite of any generation remembers the Passover, not only in his own mind, but he lifts up bread and wine and he says, God, remember the covenant that you made in the Passover, in the Exodus. And God saw the people of Israel and God knew. God's knowledge is memory when it is relative to the past. That's what the tribute is all about. That's what the Eucharist is all about. It is about entering into what Christ has definitively accomplished. That is how a meal celebrated by a young Jewish prophet in the upper room of a small house in Jerusalem is the gathering place of all the nations of the world. Remembering therefore all these things, the cross, the grave, the third day resurrection, the ascension into heaven, the session at the right hand, and the second and glorious coming. We remember the future and thus bring the future to pass. Okay, so now I want to answer the question as to, hey, Michael, I will not forget any super chat, okay? I've got a list of super chats right in front of me. It will tell me every single one of them. It will. So I promise you, I will answer every one of them. I got more than I thought. Okay, cool. I will answer every super chat tonight. This will be available as a recording tomorrow. Okay, so if you have to leave before I get to your question, it's okay. Just come and see the recording tomorrow. Okay, so really great argument or question. What kind of points do you make when talking to an atheist that tries to associate the Lord, Yad-He-Vav-He, the Tetragrammaton, the God of Israel, with a minor storm/warrior deity and a larger polytheistic picture of ancient Israel? Reading recommendations. This argument, it is amazing how much there is that shows how ridiculous this argument is. Now, I understand how troubling it can seem. I remember when I first encountered that, like, wow, this is like the final boss, right? Now, it's nonsense. It is 100% nonsense. Number one, biblical studies used to be a subdiscipline of history of religions, a discipline which originated kind of in the 18th, but mostly in the 19th century. Now, it was assumed that in the history of religion, religious tradition developed from animism, where you have spirits of broad nature, to polytheism, where you have a variety of independent deities, to quote-unquote henotheism, a ridiculous category, but it's the idea that there are many gods, but you only worship one of them, to monotheism, that there is one God and one God only. And then, for some of them, to atheism. And so, the Hebrew Bible has to be fit into this picture of ancient religion. However, there is not a single anthropologist today, at least not one that I'm aware of, who would make that case for that view of religious tradition on empirical grounds. The evidence that we have as to the development and history of ancient religion, no matter what people you're talking about, is strongly indicative that monotheism, worship of one supreme creator God, who is ontologically and qualitatively distinct from his creation, that is the original religion of mankind, that nations began by worshiping the God of heaven, and later they went into idolatry. The Hebrew Bible describes God making a covenant with Noah. Now, everyone is descended from Noah, okay? And what does Noah do? He offers a sacrifice. And he makes a distinction between clean and unclean animals. People say, well, how could there be clean and unclean animals before Israel's dietary law was given? This is just evidence that people don't read the text that they're commenting on. I mean, with all due respect, there's a difference between saying you can't eat unclean animals and saying you can't sacrifice them. What an unclean animal is, according to the Bible, is an animal which is sacrificially acceptable for no nation. Okay? The nations could offer deer on the altar if they wanted. Israel could not. Israel had 5 animals that they could offer as sacrifices. The nations could offer deer. They were not allowed to offer pigs, according to the covenant that God had made with Adam that goes down through Noah. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, when you look at Gentiles and when you look at their religion, they worship a God whom they call the God of heaven, or the Most High. The Most High is mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 32, a text that's very important for this discussion that we're going to get to in some more detail. My dog is looking at me like he has to go to the bathroom. I'll get through this question. Hopefully it won't be on the floor. Deuteronomy 32 mentions the Most High. Okay? Most High, up, we're talking about the God of heaven. Genesis chapter 14, Melchizedek, the king of righteousness. I actually think this is Shem, the son of Noah, as Sina from the Syrian does. But regardless, he refers to God as the God of heaven. In the book of Daniel, Gentiles talk about the God of heaven. In the book of Revelation, it says that the Gentiles gave glory to the God of heaven when they saw the 2 witnesses go up. I have some articles in Revelation 11. What it's all about is about the second half of the 70th week. But regardless, Ezra, Nehemiah, Darius the Great, different figure from Darius the Mede. This is Darius the Great, as we know from Persian history, the successor of Cambyses. He reconquers the Persian Empire after there was a civil war launched by a dude named Bardia. Interesting thing of its own. He worships the God of heaven. He builds a house for the God of heaven. Why is he called the God of heaven? Well, look at Psalm chapter 19. Psalm chapter 19 says that the heavens declare the glory of God. So you got the first half of it. It's all about the heavens. And it uses the name El, or Elohim. This is God. This is the Gentile name for God. God is creator. And then the second half of it is all about the Torah. And the second half of it analogizes the revelation that God has made in the Torah to Israel, for which the associated name is the Tetragrammaton, analogizes it to the heavens in the first half of the psalm, which is the means of revelation for the nations of the world. Okay, so in them, that is in the heavens, he has made a tabernacle for the sun. What is that? There is a belt across heaven through which the sun moves. That's the 12 constellations. The constellations are mentioned explicitly in the book of Job. In the book of Amos, they are also mentioned. In the book of Revelation, there are lots and lots of allusions to the constellations. Okay? I think the constellations are a tradition that go back very far. I think that they probably go back before the flood, or it may have been Noah who named them. And I think originally they were a device which was used to remember the essential revelation of God as to the coming of the Redeemer. That's why you will find all across the world, you've got the prophecy of a hero who will crush the head of the serpent. Look, there is a Native American tradition, remarkable tradition. There is a figure called Manaboshu, rather. And Manaboshu goes to a tree, and there is a serpent king who has been persecuting mankind. Oh, I gotta grab my dog. Puggy! Stop it! Puggy. He knows he's not supposed to go on this side of the room. No, Pug. I'm going to give him one more chance. Okay. Okay. 1 second. There is a serpent king. The serpent king is persecuting man. And Manaboshu, he goes to a tree. And he allows the serpent king to coil around him and crush him. But it is that crushing which ends up defeating the serpent king. And what does he do afterwards? He goes and he breathes new life into all creation. It's an incredible tradition. It's a Native American tradition. And I think it is derived from a combination of the prophetic memory, or the memory of the prophecy of the seed of the woman, who is the Messiah, and the memory of the flood, because it's contextualized in their story of the global flood. Almost all nations remember the global flood. Okay, it's a universal tradition. In India, if you look at various ancient Indian texts, you will find heroes who put their foot on the head of the dragon or on the head of the serpent. there is a Native American tradition, and I'm going from memory, which is why I'm using kind of vague, broad descriptors, but I could find you the specific name of the tribe, which remember this, because obviously Native Americans are not one thing. And there's Native American tradition of the first human beings being a woman, and the Great Spirit takes the woman, she puts her into a deep sleep, she takes a rib, makes that rib into a man. That's the first couple. This is a tradition of the great magician, the enemy of the Great Spirit, who comes and he brings death into the world by deceiving the woman. Okay? What I'm saying to you is that we have... Hold on. I don't know what happened there. Okay, there we go. We have to understand that the Bible is not the only revelation that God has made to mankind. It's the normative revelation for his people, the church. But of course, he talked to Noah. He talked to Adam. He knew the pre-flood patriarchs. Why do you think that in ancient Near Eastern Mesopotamian texts, before the flood, there were 10 kings? Well, there are 10 generations there in Genesis 5. The flood hero has 3 sons, just as he does in Genesis. And that's not only true in the ancient Near East, it's true in Hawaii. You know who, in the Hebrew language, Noah's name is Nuach. Nuach. Hawaii, the flood hero was named Nu'u. Now, it has been suggested that in the Hawaiian tradition, there are elements that are imported from the biblical story, because there are multiple Hawaiian traditions. And in one version, yes, there are probably some elements that are imported from the biblical story, but there are the other tradition still has him as Nu'u, still has him having 3 sons. Okay, this is a major problem for the conventional view of the history of the world. The Bible gives us reality. Now, let's talk about the God of heaven. Let's talk about the question of whether Israel worshipped a storm deity that began as a minor patron deity of Israel and eventually developed into the supreme God. Now, if Israel began as a polytheistic nation and it ended as monotheistic nation, it is the only nation for which we have evidence which made that transformation. The only reason it's taken for granted by biblical scholars like Mark Smith, and I think reading Mark Smith, to be perfectly honest, unless you're reading him, for reasons of critique, I've read some of his work, and I think it's a waste of time. I don't think he knows what he's talking about. Just being direct with you, honestly. As a matter of fact, I don't think he knows how to read the Bible. It's taken for granted that this process of development happened because anthropology moved away from this naive history of religions view after biblical studies had branched off and become its own thing. So what's the evidence from within the Bible that that's actually true, that Israel began as a minor storm deity? Lindsay, I don't. The devil can also talk to people. That's why there's a story about the Great Spirit taking a rib out of a woman and turning the rib into a man. I mean, I don't. Maybe I don't understand what you're saying. The Great Spirit is the supreme God. Okay, so this is God. I don't think it's the devil. I think it's a memory of a tradition that had been transmitted from Father Noah. Okay. So the evidence that Israel began as a polytheistic nation, essentially there are 2 texts. Okay, one of them is Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. The other one is Psalm 82. In Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, I'll just read it for you. Okay, I have an article on these 2 texts. I mean, it's the evidence here is pathetically weak. Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. I'll start with verse 7. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, he will show you. Your elders, they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion, that's the Tetragrammaton, is his people, and Jacob is allotted inheritance. So it is suggested here that the Most High is different from the Lord, and the Lord is the patron deity, the national deity of Israel, just like Hamash is the national deity of Moab. And he has a father, and his father is the Most High, and the Most High gives to the Lord this people, Israel, but it's not the same, just as he would give Moab to Hamash. Now, this is, if you actually look at the rest of Deuteronomy 32, the rest of Deuteronomy 32 is all about how the nations went after idolatrous gods, who were what they call no gods. And because they worship no gods, they are no people. It calls them devils. It calls them serpents.
And it ends with the victory of the God of Israel, so that all nations and all of the gods must bow down before him, for he avenges the blood of his children. He takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him, and he atones for his people's land. Now, this is a prophecy of the incarnation of Christ the King and his victory over the serpent and over those who follow the serpent. Because God in the Bible, that is with a little g, Elohim, it simply means a heavenly being, a member of the heavenly council. The serpent, the word for serpent, nachash, well, that word as an adjective means burning or means bright. Did you know that the word seraph, obviously a heavenly being, as a noun, it also means serpent. So the use of words describing serpentine beings for heavenly beings, for the angelic hosts, that is something we already know from the Bible. The gods of the nations are devils. That is, these heavenly beings, these supernatural beings, make themselves known to various nations through their idolatry and cause them to become corrupt. Now, Deuteronomy 32 is one of 4 major poetic sections in the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch's literary structure is designed like this. Genesis 1 to 11, the primeval history, it has short narratives, which are each closed by short poems. The first of those short poems is this, therefore, is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. Then Genesis 5, you've got the prophecy of Noah, who will give rest to mankind. And it goes to Genesis 11. Then there are long blocks of narrative, and then there are long poems. Genesis 12 to 48, then Genesis 49, long poem. Then Exodus 1 to 14, Exodus 15, long poem. Exodus 16 to Numbers chapter 22, then 23, 24, long poem. Numbers 25 to Deuteronomy 31, then Deuteronomy 32, 33, long poem. Okay, and these poems connect with 2 things. They connect with each other and they connect with the primeval history, because remember, the primeval history is the kind of opening part of the structure and it is a miniaturized version of the whole Pentateuch. So in the poems of the Pentateuch, it makes allusion to the coming of the Messiah, and these intertextual references allow us to see the centrality of the Messiah to the whole story of the Torah, the whole story of the Pentateuch. And it connects the Messiah thereby with the primeval history. So in Deuteronomy 32, when we have this reference to God dividing mankind, that word refers back to Genesis 11. God divides mankind at the Tower of Babel or Babylon. Okay? And when God addresses his council, he uses the first person plural, because the archetype of the council is the pre-eternal council of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so in Genesis 11, he says, let us go down and confuse their tongues. In other words, the other deities assist him in this project. And this is like in 1 Kings, where we see that God sends an evil spirit who ends up providentially doing his purpose. Here we see that the judgment of the nations is they're being given over to these other deities who are cruel. So this is a reference back to Genesis chapter 11. And in Genesis chapter 11, there are lots of connections with Genesis chapter 6, which refers to the sons of God. The number of the sons of God is referred to here. Now, the number of the sons of God, we have the divine council, and symbolically, it is associated with the number 70. So there are like 70 archons, 70 patron deities of the various nations. Okay, because there are 70 nations originally in Genesis chapter 10. Divides them according to the number of the sons of God. But in fact, the word for council, that is like the council of God, its gematria is actually 70. So I think this is the reason why 70 symbolizes the number of the sons of God. Now, some people will say this is a Near Eastern concept. You can go to Ugarit, you will find that they have the idea of a heavenly council made up of 70 deities. But it's not just a Near Eastern concept. It's part of the common tradition that goes back to Noah, because there are African traditions of a divine council of 70 deities as well. This is something you will notice again and again. If you know your mythology, and if you look outside the Near East, you find that what is usually said to be Near Eastern, and so the Bible stole from the Near East or borrowed from a Near Eastern worldview, actually, it's the Noachic worldview. And the Near East, like everywhere else, speaks in this common way. It goes back to divine revelation. So what's going on in Deuteronomy 32? Well, God gives the nations over to these other heavenly beings, but he takes Israel as his own. So we know this because Genesis 11 is then followed by God creating a new nation ex nihilo. And that nation is the children of Abraham. God takes this people for his own. He finds them in the wilderness. Well, the wilderness is the place of exile. So where does he draw them from? He draws them from Mesopotamia. Abraham comes from Mesopotamia. He goes into Haran. His father dies. Then he comes into the land. It's like the Exodus. They come out of Egypt. They go into the wilderness. The older generation dies. They go into the land. And then you go through the story, and then exile. They go back to where they began. They go to exile to Babylon. They come out to new patriarchal period. The return from Babylon is to the coming of Jesus what the period of the patriarchs is to the Exodus. Now, Deuteronomy 32 has plenty of evidence that God, the God of Israel, is the supreme God. One of them is that he defeats all of these other deities. These other deities are forced to bend the knee to him. Another piece of evidence is, the last stage of this development is supposed to be Isaiah 40 to 55, which is alleged to come from Deutero-Isaiah, a person who did not exist. It's all Isaiah. Now, Isaiah 40 to 55, the reason that people say, that scholars say, that this is the first monotheistic text, because besides me, there is no other. It's a language that's used. Well, that language comes from Deuteronomy 32. It is literally a quotation of Deuteronomy 32. So what is supposed to represent the end point of this developmental story is actually a quotation from the text, which is supposed to represent its beginning point. Isaiah as a whole has lots of quotations from Deuteronomy 32. The prophets as a whole quote the Pentateuch, especially its poetic sections, quite a bit. Now, people will say, well, it doesn't mean the same thing in Isaiah that it means in Deuteronomy 32. I mean, what a joke. It uses the same language because it's a quotation. And in fact, Isaiah 40 to 55, Babylon as a city says, besides me, there is no other. It is not saying there is literally no other being who is identifiable with the word El, but that relative to these other deities, the God of Israel is supreme. Now, if you want a good response to this nonsense, and it is nonsense, from, I don't know what you call it, Benjamin Sommers, he's, he accedes, I think, way too much to source criticism, but he's a very sharp gentleman, the Jewish scholar. He has an article at the end of his book, The Bodies of God, the World of Ancient Israel, as an article on monotheism in the Hebrew Bible. Clearly, in the Hebrew Bible, God is unique relative to the other deities. He is uniquely sovereign because he has no one who can contest his power. There's not a single text in the whole Hebrew Bible where God's power is seriously in dispute. Now, clearly, there is a kind of plurality in God. Christians believe in the Trinity. And the Hebrew Bible has this figure called the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord is a distinct figure, a figure with very distinctive features. In Exodus 23, he is said, it said of him that my name is in him. Okay, a name reveals the character or qualities of a thing, right? The name reveals what a thing is. And the name of God reveals his character. When people call upon the name of the Lord liturgically, they're saying, God, act in relation to us as you have revealed yourself to be. So Exodus 33 to 34, God reveals his name to Moses. Why? Because God is revealing that the kind of God he is the faithful one. Therefore, he will be faithful to Israel. Thus, we call on the name of the Lord and say, God, be faithful, fulfill the promise that you have made to us. And thus, we speak the name is spoken back to us, and we are in dialogue, and that is communion. This is the theology of the Jesus prayer. So it says of Moses that he knew God mouth to mouth. He was in constant dialogue with God. Constant dialogue with God. So the angel of the Lord is the head of the heavenly hosts. He is the heavenly high priest. So in Zechariah chapter 3, Joshua, the high priest, he stands before the angel of the Lord. Essentially, you want to think of it as a mirror, right? So earth is a mirror of heaven. When Joshua is looking into the heavenly archetype of his liturgical system, the angel of the Lord is the one who corresponds to Joshua. Now, Joshua is said to be a sign of the Messiah. And Jesus' name is just Joshua. Yeshua is an abbreviated form of Joshua. So, behold, he is a sign of my servant, the branch. The branch is a name for Messiah, Isaiah 11, Jeremiah 23, and so forth. And the very figure who is identified as a sign of the coming Messiah is Joshua, the high priest, the one who shares a name with Jesus, who is a priest and a king at the same time. Now, some people say there are two figures here in Zechariah 3, a priest and a king. And they cite as evidence that the council of peace will be between them both. But actually, the council of peace being between them both, the peace being referred to is between Joshua and God. And he is the one through whom peace is established between God and Israel. We can see that this is the case in parallel passages in Haggai 2. In this place I will give peace. Well, the place is the temple. It says that they will gather gold and silver from the nations to help build the temple. And in fact, in Zechariah 3 and 6, we've got gold and silver being gathered from the nations to crown Joshua the high priest. And Romans 5, 1 to 11 says that having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him, we have obtained access into that, by faith, into that grace in which we stand. So Zechariah 3 says, behold, the men who stand before the Lord are signs of what is coming. So there's the angel of the Lord, distinct figure. He's not just a created angel. In, for example, Genesis 18. Genesis 18, the God of Israel comes to Abraham. He's got two angels beside him, right? So those two angels are created angels. They're his right-hand men. The reason that he's coming, this is like a closer look into what happens when God says, let us go down to Babel. Well, Sodom and Gomorrah are a new Babel. God comes down. The angel of the Lord comes with two witnesses. They're two witnesses because this is a forensic, it's a legal action. They're examining the accused and then pronouncing a verdict of guilty. And then it says, the Lord rained fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. It's not just that text which shows us a plurality within God. It is the fact that that comes within a narrative context where we already know that the distinctive signs of the divine angel have appeared. So this is the angel of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord. In Genesis 15, he's called the word of the Lord. The name of God is in him because everything God says about himself is inside the angel of the Lord. And then in the Gospel of John, the Logos reveals the name of the Lord. That's why Jesus says, I have made your name known to the world. In John 1, 1 to 18, it says that he is full of grace and truth. Now, actually, this is an allusion to Exodus 33 to 34, where God is revealed as the Lord, a God merciful and gracious. In the Septuagint, it is grace and truth that is used. So the Logos is the angel of the Lord. He's called the Word in Genesis 15, and then in the book of Samuel, the word of the Lord is rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. So there is that kind of plurality. God does have an angel in whom and through whom he speaks. But the Lord was not originally a storm deity. Okay, so the reason that God is associated with a storm is, number one, the supreme God is associated with things in the heavens, right? Okay, the heavens is the archetype of the earth, and there are two heavens. There's the heavens we see, and then there's the heaven of heavens. Solomon says, heaven and highest heaven cannot contain you. Literally, heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you. The tabernacle has three parts. It has the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and then the courtyard. Courtyard is earth. The holy place is the visible heavens. That's why it has the menorah. The sun, moon, and 5 planets correspond to the 5 branches of the menorah. And then it has the heaven of heavens. Okay, just like we've got heaven of heavens, and in the heavens, we have Holy of Holies, and then the holy. The holy place, places in brackets there. It's the holy. Just thinking about where I want to go next with that. Psalm 82. Should say a gentleman, a biblical scholar, once said, well, Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9, the reason that the other parts of the text don't count is because those other parts were added later. Deuteronomy 32, 8 to 9 was originally separate. And you know what the evidence for that is? It's that it's introduced by saying, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, he will show you. Your elders, they will tell you. Oh, so it's quoting a pre-existing tradition. We know that because it says, ask your elders and they will tell. I mean, I don't usually speak in a mocking way. At least I don't think I do. But this is just so ridiculous. The reason that it uses that language is because this is a major theme of the book of Deuteronomy. Tell your children, remember it day and night. When you wake up, when you go to bed, when you walk, when you sit, when you stand, tell your children, remember, ask your father, tell your children. That's the theme of the book of Deuteronomy. That's why it uses that language. It's not because it's quoting a pre-existing tradition. Okay, if we are allowed to cut the text up that way, you can interpret any sentence however you want. I mean, it's not a serious argument. And then they'll use linguistic arguments. Oh, well, this represents an earlier form of Hebrew. I'm sorry. How exactly did you reconstruct the history of the Hebrew language? What are our sources here? Because you have to remember, the literary form of a language is not the same thing as the spoken form. Okay, like the only reason that it's the same today is because everybody can read. But think about literary Greek. And at a time when most people are not literate, the literary form of a language is different than the spoken form. It changes more slowly. What is our representative selection of texts from all of the periods in question for literary Hebrew? It's the Bible. Until the Dead Sea Scrolls, until the post-exilic period, that's it. So how exactly are we reconstructing a history of the Hebrew language by which we can redate the Bible? The only reason we can construct a history of the Hebrew language in the first place is because we have the Bible. So Robert Alter, who's a good scholar on the kind of literary craftsmanship of the Bible, the Song of Song, or the Book of Ruth. The Book of Ruth, it's a later text, but it's meant to look earlier. It's meant to look, so it uses archaic Hebrew forms, but little slips tell us it's actually later. I mean, hello, as Peter Leithart points out, why can't those little slips constitute evidence that they're earlier forms? And then you can spin it however you want. I mean, the fundamental problem with these arguments is not an error of fact, usually. It is an incapacity to use logic. It's like kind of the debate over mark and priority. Not talking about Shabir here, but talking just in general. Scholars will use arguments which demonstrate only that Mark is the mediating point between Matthew and Luke, as if they were arguments for mark and priority. But those two things aren't the same, and they won't even know that they failed to demonstrate their purported conclusion here. So Psalm 82. Psalm 82 is a fun text. Psalm 82 is actually recited on Holy Saturday. That is when Christ goes into the grave and he conquers Hades. He despoils the devil. So Psalm 82 is recited because Psalm 82 takes place in the heavenly council, and God condemns the gods of the nations. He condemns those heavenly beings who have persecuted the nations. Think about Mesoamerica. Okay, so Adam and Eve, when they ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they wanted to exalt themselves into the heavenly council. So even today, people will eat mushrooms, or they will use ayahuasca. They will have a meal of some kind of food, and that will supposedly exalt them into a heavenly courtroom. So the whole idea that food can exalt you into the heavenly sanctuary, I mean, God has endowed the world with these innate powers, and that includes some very serious plants that you shouldn't mess with. So Adam and Eve wanted to enter into the heavenly council. They ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, in Mesoamerica, they would take, we call them psychedelic plants. They enter into conversation with these beings. And what do these beings tell them to do? I mean, people today are like, oh, it's a Native American thing. We encounter entities. Are these good entities? Do they have our best interests in mind? Maybe you should consider that the kind of culture these entities thought was cool was one in which they would go to war, take captive women and children, put them on their altar, and rip out their heart while it was still beating, or ritually torture them so that they could get as much suffering and pain out of it as possible. And in that way, they could appease their gods. These are not good beings, and they're not things that human beings are generally inclined to do without a push from the outside. People say that's like an animal, but animals don't do that. That's a uniquely human crime. And it's because there's influence from these evil heavenly beings whose malice is pure. With human beings, our good deeds are mixed with evil. You know, if we give to the poor, it's mixed with a little pride. And our evil deeds are mixed with good. I mean, the people who do bad stuff, they have some good intention that's mixed in there somewhere. The kind of purity in which of malice, which is present in these rebellious heavenly beings, is horrific to behold. And those are the beings who are being condemned in Psalm chapter 82. Psalm chapter 82 describes the heavenly council, the gods. It says that you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you, because God rules the world through his Son. And so the archons who are partners with him in reigning over the world, they are called sons. And now we are seated in heaven with Christ. We are adopted as sons. You are God, sons of the Most High, all of you. Now, godhood is associated with immortality. So in Romans chapter 1, Paul says that mankind exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and beasts. So you become what you worship. If you worship that which does not have life in itself, and you take that as your ultimate good, then you will become mortal. That's what happens. You take as your ultimate good what is not ultimate, and thus you lose your connection with that which is existent intrinsically, and thus you begin to disintegrate, disintegrate, fall apart, die. Glory is what makes us immortal. The glory of God, the brightness of God, the uncreated energies, we say in Orthodoxy. And all across the world, the kind of conceptual shape of this idea of a God is associated with mortality and immortality. You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, as Adam is how it is literally rendered. As Adam, you will die and fall like any prince. So this is an allusion to Genesis chapter 3. So here we have, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. So you're immortal because you're gods. Nevertheless, as Adam, you will die. That reverses what the devil told Eve, which said, you will not surely die. God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be as gods. So here we've got men who, and the devil says to those who are men, Adam and Eve, though you are men, you will not die because you will be as gods. Well, the reverse of that is you are gods, nevertheless you will die as Adam. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Satan brought mortality into the world, therefore he is struck with the curse that he brought into mankind. When it says that his head will be crushed, when it says that he will eat dust, well, what's dust? God made man from dust, said, to dust you will return. Dust is death. The devil eats the dead. That is why he is signified by birds of prey. Birds of prey, unclean birds, they often eat the dead. Okay, so hell is for the devil and his angels. The reason people go there is because they are joined with the devil. Isaiah 34 says God takes a sword. It will drink its fill in the heavens. That is, it will first go and defeat the gods, and then it will fall on earth and defeat those men who are allied with the gods. So the devil eats dust. He eats the dead. He's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He is signified by unclean birds. That's why when Abraham divides the animals in two, he drove away the birds of prey. The curse of the covenant is to be divided in two and to be left for the birds of prey. So Ezekiel 38 to 39, the birds of prey descend to eat the dead, the corpses of those who have been cursed by God. Same thing in Revelation chapter 19. And then he is placed in the grave, in Sheol, under the earth. Isaiah 14 describes him as the king of Babylon, or Babel. Okay, Babel or Babel. This is the archetypal city of man, the archetypal city in rebellion against God, the archetypal people who are organized against God under the leadership of the devil and his angels. Okay, so that's what is going on in Babel. In Babel, you've got a horizontal unity. Nations are united by blood, by the violence of Nimrod. It says he's a mighty slaughterer before the Lord. Well, before the Lord, that sacrificial language connects him with Cain, who killed his brother. And his brother's murder is like a threshold sacrifice because he builds a city immediately afterwards, just like Hiel kills, offers a human sacrifice to build Jericho. Okay, you first offer a sacrifice and you build a city, and you offer it at the boundary point of the city. That's why Adam's relics are buried at the boundary point of Jerusalem. So we've got the tradition that Jesus was crucified over the bones of Adam, and actually makes a great deal of sense because Jesus is crucified at he's crucified outside the borders of the city, but it's incorporated into the city about 10 years later. So, but the Holy Sepulchre is outside the borders of the city in AD 30, but not in AD 40. So this is one evidence for its authenticity. And Shem, if he is indeed Melchizedek, as Jewish tradition says, as St. Ephraim the Syrian says, I think it makes a lot of sense because Noah's blessing on Shem resembles Melchizedek's blessing on Abram. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. So if the first city is Babylon, the second city is Jerusalem, just like the first Adam has died. The second Adam, or last Adam, has given us new life and immortality. So I think what happened is that Noah took the relics of Adam on the ark. He gave them to his son and heir, Shem, Melchizedek, who buried them at the borders of the city, that is Salem or Jerusalem. Now, actually, I made that guess just based on what I knew of the Bible, based on what I knew of kind of the reasoning of all this. And one of the really remarkable things that I found out is that the guess that I made, just based on what we see in the Bible, actually, it's a tradition. So that really, I think, confirms it's a Jewish tradition that Noah brought the relics on the ark and then buried them. Hashem buried them. I think it underscores the unity of idea and reality, of idea and history, and suggests that our tradition of Jesus being crucified over the bones of Adam is actually accurate. That's why in iconography, the cross, you will see a skull below the cross. That represents the skeleton of Adam. So Psalm 82 is suggested to talk about, they say that in the time of King David wanted to unite these two distinct people groups that became the northern and southern kingdom. So he conflated the Lord and El Shaddai, the god of the northern kingdom. It's a silly idea, and that's where they get the whole thing about J is the Jahwist source and E is the Elohist source. It's not true, but they say David conflated them for political reasons. And Psalm 82, it shows the moment of transition, because it says, "Arise, O God, and you will inherit all the nations." Okay, so one of the problems here is that, so they say it shows the transition between when the Lord was the patron deity of Israel and when he was the God of the whole earth. Now, the problem here is it doesn't, in fact, use the Tetragrammaton. So they have to take another step. They say, well, originally it used the Tetragrammaton, and later they changed it to Elohim. You know, you just get more and more removed from the actual text as it stands. There's no evidence that the God of Israel was a minor storm deity. The reason that he's identified with the storm is because he's the supreme God, and the supreme God is consistently identified with things in the heavens, just as the clouds are in the heavens. Okay, the storm is in the heavens. The storm is that which changes things, comes through. It gives new life and it takes life away. God says, I kill and make alive. The storm comes through, it rains on the earth, and it gives the ground a new birth, but it can also send forth a tornado and kill and rip up the a city just like that. So it's sometimes this idea is very well presented. It seems very sophisticated. It seems very, you think, well, how am I going to respond to this? But it's garbage. It's 100% nonsense. So I'm really thankful that just providentially I encountered objections to Christianity one by one. Like, I would only encounter a new objection once I'd resolved the previous one. I think that's just providence, because it would have been overwhelming if I got it all at once. But one by one, 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 is still 0. Okay, so it can seem overwhelming at first, but actually there's a very sophisticated response to every single one of these arguments. And not just sophisticated in the terms of complexity, but in terms of its correspondence with reality. It's a very good response to every one of these arguments. Okay. Let's see then. Jade, I actually agree that 666 corresponds to the 666 talents of gold in that King Solomon received. Okay, so King Solomon received 666 talents of gold. That was the beginning of his violation of the 3 laws of kingship. Don't multiply gold. Don't multiply horses, which are aggressive warfare. Don't multiply wives, i.e. don't have more than one wife. Okay, the Bible forbids polygamy. Okay, the Bible says that if you are polygamous, you are really married to 2 wives. Okay, so this is the important point. If you marry more than one wife, you're really married. Okay, and that means that you have to take care of them both. But it's a curse. You can cut off your arm. It'll really be cut off, but it's a sin to cut off your arm. Leviticus chapter, I think it's chapter 18, says don't marry more than one woman. Now, many translations have rendered it don't marry the sister of your wife. But actually, if you look at the way that this text is used in 1 Samuel chapter 1, it is presented as if it is being violated by Elkanah, who is married to 2 women, one of whom is Hannah. And actually, the translation, it has been recently argued, is better understood to forbid polygamy absolutely. So polygamy is ontologically possible, but it's always wrong. If you marry more than one wife, you're stuck with it, but you're not supposed to. So the first person who marries more than one wife is Lamech, the descendant of Cain. It represents the climax of wickedness. So think about before the flood, on the Cainite side, the devil attacks marriage, polygamy. On the Sethite side, the devil attacks marriage, the sons of God, daughters of man. The devil always brings things to a climax with an attack on marriage, because marriage is the glue of a society. It networks, it ties people together. Not just the husband and the wife, but the families are tied together by it. That is why there is a marriage feast. You are what you eat. So if you eat the same thing, you are each other. That's why the Eucharist draws us into each other and into Christ. Christ enters into us, and we enter into Christ. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood shall be in me, and I in him, Jesus says. And so that is why after Adam and Eve are married, Genesis 2, what happens? They have a feast. They eat, but they eat at a marital liturgy, a feast celebrated by the devil and not God. And in the marriage feast, it's not just the husband and wife who eat the food, but it's their families. The families themselves are being glued together. They're being tied together so that there is a, when you tie more and more families together, it means that their destinies belong to each other. The good of one is the good of another. It reduces the benefits of exploitation and conflict. That's the theoretical reason why the royal families of Europe are intermarrying with each other, right? Or intermarried with each other. Okay. Uh-huh. Esther Oil, thank you very much. I generally do these streams once a week. I haven't done it in the past month or so, just because I've been preparing for the debate, some other stuff. Actually, I meant to get a haircut a couple days ago. I was going to get it on Sunday, but I live in Virginia, so 1 inch of snow means everything is closed down. So the haircut place is closed on Monday, and on Sunday it was closed because it snowed. So I just had my Beatles hair. Now, people sometimes said, you have a Beatles haircut, as if that was an insult. Like, weren't the Beatles really attractive? So, whatever. But I did used to have, I mean, maybe I still have, but if I do, don't tell me it. My mother used to cut my hair, which doesn't happen anymore. And the day after going to school, people, oh, did your mom put a bowl on your head and cut around it? My hair was almost as famous as the George Bush picture that I had above my shoulder in my old videos. I think I only have one video from that period that's still public. The other ones are private videos. I still have them, but they're privatized. It's my response to Matt Dillahunty on the Gospel of Matthew. Speaking of debates, maybe I should have a debate with Matt Dillahunty. Again, it would be a really interesting kind of a rematch or whatever. I know like there was that stirred up a lot of stuff. Matt actually was, I've seen some of his post-debate commentary. He was very gracious about it. So I think he's a sharp guy. I have more respect for him than I used to, not because he's changed, but because I think maybe I don't know if this sounds pretentious, but I think he's a sharp guy. I think obviously he's pretty profoundly wrong. But I saw his review of Patterns of Evidence, the documentary that makes an argument for the Exodus. I was really impressed by it because he doesn't just kind of dismiss it. He acknowledges, okay, so there's some good points here, but there's some ambiguities as well. Of course, there's some ambiguities, but I was really I was impressed by it. I was surprised by it. I hadn't seen his stuff in a while, and so yeah, maybe I'll have a debate with him at some point. Okay, let me look at the other super chats now, and I will keep my promise to do every single super chat tonight. Okay, just have to refresh the page. Okay. Mm-hmm. 1 minute. 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 1
Okay. Now, gonna. Do Muslims have any historical argument for the crucifixion having been someone else and not Jesus? All I ever hear is because the Quran says so. So Shabir's position is that Jesus is basically the swoon theory, that Jesus was nailed to the cross and it was really him, but he didn't die. Okay, he was taken up to heaven. That's his position. The position of most of the classical commentators is that he was replaced on the cross by someone else, usually Judas. This actually, the idea comes from various Gnostic texts, which were available in Muhammad's general area and in the area in which the Quran was composed, where it's not Jesus who is crucified, because, of course, it reflects a ascetic Christology where Jesus is not corporeal. He kind of floats above the ground. He doesn't really have a body. So, of course, he couldn't be crucified. He appears by Peter's side in the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, laughing at those who thought that they could crucify the Son of God. And this had been cited by some Muslims kind of as external evidence for the idea. But in reality, I think it's an argument the opposite way, because it's very telling that the Quran has these ideas which hold currency in the area that it was composed. If its production context is heaven, if it's an eternal book, at the very least, it should not have any correlation between the texts which are available around the Arabian Peninsula in terms of what stories about Jesus are presented. Why don't we have stories of Jesus that are from the Ascension of Isaiah there? Why is it just the Syriac and Arabic texts that are available from which we have stories of Jesus? So the argument would basically be by citing texts like the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, but I think what those Islamic apologists don't understand, and Shabir isn't one of them because he doesn't take the classical interpretation. I think what they don't understand is that these were available to whoever it was that composed the Quran. Okay. Hello, Bog. Okay. Could you explain why the Eucharist is not a violation of the command not to drink blood in Leviticus and the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15? The reason that we can't drink blood, and I think this applies today just as it did in the Apostolic Age. I don't think we should have blood sausage or anything like that. It's not one of the weightier matters of the Torah, but it is something that I think applies to everyone. It's given to Noah, and that's why the apostles see it as applying to all mankind, Jews and Gentiles alike. Is because the life of the flesh is in the blood. I made a video about blood in the Bible, actually, and why the biblical notion of life being associated with blood is well grounded. Think about what we know blood does. Blood carries oxygen throughout the body. And it's remarkable because life is associated with motion or energy. What is it that gives us energy? Well, it's oxygen. It is taken in through the mouth, through our breath, and then diffused through our heart and circulatory system. Breath, spirit, they're often the same word in most languages. So life is diffused through the heart, through the blood. And it's not just a symbol. Okay, reality is constituted as an imprint of symbolic archetypes. The thing which is symbolized is always communicated in the symbol itself. The sign communicates and imprints that which is signified. When I say blue, the word blue is a sign of blueness, and I am causing you to have in your mind the image of blue. You don't have a choice. When I say, think of a blue elephant, 99% of you are thinking now, have an image in your mind of a blue elephant, because the sign carries the thing which is signified. So that is what blood is all about. Well, we are supposed to take Jesus' life into ourselves. We aren't supposed to take the life of animals into ourselves, but we're just supposed to take the life of Jesus into ourselves. His life is mine is one of the titles of Saint Sophrony of Essex's books. The Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. It's the body and blood of the risen Christ. And the reason that we're not supposed to drink the blood of animals is the reason we are supposed to have the blood of Christ. So that would be my answer. Codex Justinianus says, give me your refutation of Seventh-day Adventism. Well, my refutation of the idea that Christians should observe the 7-day Sabbath is that crunch. Crap, hold on. Oh, sorry, I just knocked over something, and I gotta make sure that it doesn't. Give me a second, guys. Okay. All right. I'm glad I didn't get electrocuted because it did spill a little bit on a plug thing. Gotta get a towel and just put that on the floor. Ooh, that's gonna cause a stain. I'm gonna have to pay for that. Whatever. Hold on, guys. I guarantee there's gonna be someone out there tonight who says this is a sign I've been cursed. Come on, Shabir. I don't know why I just called my dog Shabir. I was just thinking of him, and so I said, it wasn't intentional. Yeah. Come here, Bug. Oh boy! All right, crap. Well, as it was said in the book of Job, the thing which I have dreaded has come upon me. I've known for ages that I need to get a new bottle. I have these refillable water bottles, okay? And these refillable water bottles, I fill them with water, and then I put like these sweeteners in there, these zero sugar sweeteners. And they're red. They're deep red. And I've known that it's always been a danger that I'm going to knock them off. I'm going to knock it off with my elbow or a pillow or something like that. And I'm going to think at that moment, oh, I should have changed the water bottle. I should have gotten one that I can recap. And that thing which I have dreaded has come upon me. So at least it didn't destroy anything. Unfortunately, this undoubtedly has stained the carpet, and I'm going to have to pay for that, but life goes on, ladies and gentlemen. Life goes on. All right. Hello, Bug. Okay. No, it's not the value pack. It's from Walmart. I don't drink caffeine. I take Vivarin. Okay, and I don't like the taste of coffee. And I don't like to use caffeine every day. What I will do is I will use it before like a debate. I'll take caffeine, or a live stream. I'll take caffeine, but I don't develop a tolerance to it because I take it not every day. So what I do take, it's these Crystal Light Fruit Punch things. I think it's like 5 calories per serving, but I have 1 liter bottles, and I will put a whole thing in there. So I don't know, it's probably like 25 calories or whatever. Okay. What's a live leak video? I've never heard of a live leak video. Bug. Puggy, come here. I think he has to go out. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take my dog out right now. I don't want him to pee on the floor. All right. I'm going to take him out right after I... Okay. What the...
1 second. Hold on. Okay, I am going to take the dog. I will be back in a few moments. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, as I have pinned, by the way, can everyone hear me okay? To make sure. So I have pinned. I will get to every super chat within the same stream. It will be recorded. Puggy, come here, treat. Puggy, treat. Come here, let's go. Puggy, come here. Puggy, there we go. Come on. I swear, man. I'm just moving my water so that I don't have the same thing happen. And seeing if my butthead, where in the world did I stick? I hate when this happens. Bug, come here. Come on, Puggy, come on. Where in the world did I stick my phone? I hate it when this happens, seriously. Oh, for heaven's sake. You know what, I'm going to give up on that. Honestly. Okay. I swear, man. Whatever. Bug, what are you eating? Sorry, guys. Well, Matthew, unfortunately, Puggy likes to walk around outside, and he likes to find the exact correct spot where he will do his business. So, my dog does take 15 minutes. Don't know what to tell you. Oh, for here. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'm just gonna get them the stuff. I want to make sure the dog doesn't see. He eats like these microscopic things, and I have no idea what exactly it is he's chewing on. But so I like to keep him right here. I think I left my phone downstairs, but I'm not gonna go back down. Bug, come on. Okay. What in the world? Puggy, what are you doing? Okay. Now I'm going to go back to I'm just pulling up the page which shows me where my thingamabob, where the list of super chats is. Supers. Okay. Now, Andrew Walker. What do you say in Codex? Did you answer? Did you ask before or after? Oh, you did ask before. Okay. Give me a refutation of Seventh-day Adventism. My refutation is, if you look at early Christian texts, it's very clear that across a wide geographic span, the Sunday liturgy is taken as normative. This is true. You can see this in Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger reports it to the Emperor Trajan about Christians. It's taken as a symbol, as a sign, a distinctive Christian practice very early in the 2nd century, but it makes sense theologically as well. So for those who are not familiar, the essential argument of Seventh-day Adventism is that the seventh-day Sabbath is a universal human practice, or that it's a universal human obligation, and the church made a mistake in taking Sunday to be its day of liturgical worship. Now, the theological reason why Sunday is the day of liturgical worship is because it's not only the first day, but it's the 8th day. And in fact, it's being the 8th day clarifies the character in which it is the first day. The 8th day is when circumcision happens, right? Why is it that circumcision happens on the 8th day? Well, if you look at the chronology of the flood year, if I recall correctly, Noah, when he emerges from the ark, he actually gets off on a Sunday. Why? Because the first week signifies God's first creative movement. And the resurrection of Jesus is not simply a return to Eden, but it is the perfection, the glorification of the creation. So Adam was naked. Adam was not corrupt, but he was not glorified. He did not wear a robe of God's glory. He was not yet a king. He was preparing and being tutored for his enthronement. Jesus is glorified. Jesus wears a robe of glory and beauty, as did the high priest. And it says in the book of Revelation that we wear a garment of glory, which is the righteous acts of the saints. The righteous acts of the saints are the acts of Christ, which we wear because we are in Christ. As many of you who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Hallelujah. That's what Paul says in Galatians and what we say in our liturgical service. So, why worship on Sunday? Well, because what we're doing is we are entering in, not into the first Sabbath, but into the 8th day Sabbath. It is not merely the completion of the first creation, but the beginning of the new creation. A new world is born. As Jesus says in the Gospel of John, the woman is in pain until she gives birth, and then her joy replaces her pain. And that joy is the joy of the renewed city of God. Isaiah chapter 4 and Isaiah chapter 60 and Isaiah chapter 65 and 66 and Jeremiah chapter 3. It shows us that the glory of God, it comes, it fills and permeates the city of Jerusalem. And when it permeates the city of Jerusalem, it not only overshadows God's covenant people, but it extends the presence out to the nations. There are two complementary ways in which this is shown. Number one, all of the nations are shown to be compressed into the city of Jerusalem. And number two, the city of Jerusalem extends itself out to the ends of the earth. That is why a river of life flows out from Jerusalem, from the Holy of Holies in the temple, goes to the ends of the earth, and it sanctifies every inch of the cosmos. So in Zechariah chapter 14, we are shown that the river flows, I think, from east to west there, just as in Zechariah 6, from north to south, the chariot of God goes. And in fact, the chariot of God in Zechariah chapter 6, 4 horsemen, which are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the chariot of God, this is a symbol of the river of life, the river of divine presence, because look at 1 Kings chapter 7, you've got 10 water stands, and those water stands are chariots. Those chariots have 2 faces of the 4 faces of the cherubim. They have the ox and they've got the lion, because ox is the priestly face, the lion is the kingly face, and it's built in the Solomonic age. So it's built in the kingly period where we've had the Mosaic period and we've had the royal period. So ox and lion, and it has large wheels on the bottom of it, because what it is showing is the chariot of God, which is the expression of divine presence flowing outwards to the ends of the world. And that is why these 10 water stands, 5 on each side, they symbolize the river of life. And they have 3 sections. And it's the top section, which has the water in it, corresponding to the Holy of Holies, because inward is upward, symbolically speaking. You go inward, you're going upward. You go closer to the Holy of Holies, closer to the heaven of heavens, right? That is why you've got a golden pole that's run horizontally through the tabernacle. That's part of the instructions in Exodus 25 to 31. Why is there a golden pole? Because symbolically, it is like it is being held up. In is up. And the water stands symbolize the outflow of the Holy of Holies. And that's why in the book of Ezekiel, what is it? We see that God rides a chariot. And it is the divine presence, the river of life, which is flowing out to the ends of the earth through God's chariot. Now, the river of life shows us the priestly aspect. The chariot shows the kingly aspect, because kingly symbolism is all about dominion. It's about conquest. Kings are conquerors. Kings are those who subject lands to their sovereignty. And so Joseph is 110 years old. So is Joshua. The king is the conqueror. Joseph extends God's dominion over the Gentile territory does so through evangelism. Joshua does the same thing, but he does so in relation to the Canaanites through conquest. But in both cases, we're dealing with a consecration. We're dealing with holy space. That is why God says of the Canaanites, they are harem. They are devoted to God. And the Canaanites could either convert, as Rahab did, and they become devoted in that sense. They go up to God's altar in that sense, or they were executed. Both are examples of consecration to God. And so we see that the priestly and kingly aspects of the Messianic ministry are two sides of one coin. Zechariah 6 says the chariot of God rides outwards, and it puts God's spirit at rest in the north country. That's where Babel is. In other words, just as Israel goes into rest in the book of Joshua after they conquered the land, so God conquers Babylon by the chariot of God, which is the river of life. God sanctifies the creation by filling it with his presence. And that's why Zechariah chapter 14, all the nations, they come to Jerusalem. We're told that the bell on the horse will be engraved with holy to the Lord. Well, holy to the Lord is what's engraved on the crown of the high priest. That's the holiest liturgical object in the whole system of ancient Israel in terms of vestments. So the most common thing, your tennis shoes, in other words, are as holy as the most holy thing because God's presence is all in all. That is what the imagery is telling us. And that's what the eighth day is all about. Because the flood is not just the renewal, rebirth of the world, it is the exaltation of man. Noah is exalted. Okay, so God is the one who issues the sentence of life and death in Genesis 3. Noah is given the authority to carry out the death penalty in Genesis chapter 9. Noah is given the authority to execute murderers. Why? Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, because God made man in his own image. Well, the because there goes to both parts. Killing another human being is a capital offense because God made man in his own image. You're killing an image of God. And also, it is men who carry out the sentence of death because God made man in his own image. God exalts Noah. The same water which comes from heaven, the same water which kills the wicked, lifts the ark up. Noah is derived from the word for rest, and the ark rests on the mountain. Then Noah offers an ascension offering of all clean animals representing all creation. What Noah gives to God, God gives back to Noah. Noah offers all the animals to God on the altar, and God says, you may eat all animals. Sacrifice corresponds to food. Every sacrifice is also a feast, symbolically speaking. And Noah is exalted because of his fidelity to God in contrast to Adam. In Genesis 2, God plants the garden. In Genesis 9, Noah plants a vineyard. In Genesis 1 and 2, God rests. In Genesis 9, Noah rests in his tent. In Genesis 3, God issues the sentence. In Genesis 9, Noah issues the sentence. Noah is the image of God. He is the exaltation of man. And he signifies and anticipates the coming of the Messianic King, which is not just the seventh day, but it is the eighth day. And historically speaking, we can see that the eighth day is pervasive. In the book of Revelation, we are told, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, which is used throughout early Christianity to refer to Sunday. But we're told in the book of Acts that it's the first day of the week where worship happens. Ignatius of Antioch tells us that the early Christians worshiped on Sunday, and he knew the apostles. So the idea that of Seventh-day Adventists that that Christians should have kept observing the seventh-day Sabbath, with all respect to them, and actually Leonard Brand is an Adventist. He's a scientist, a geologist, done some great work on the flood and stuff. I respect that, but it's just it's not sustainable. So let's see what else we have. Okay. Emperor Maximilian of Mexico. What would relations between states be like in a Christian world order, and how would it differ from current understanding of national sovereignty? I think one of the things that we see in international relations today is it is taken for granted that we are all lying to each other and we all hate each other. We are all spying on each other. I mean, it's taken for granted, but it's honestly kind of repulsive, right? We're all smiling at each other. We have our spies and our allies. We're spying on Germany. Germany's spying on us. We're spying on Israel. Israel is spying on us. We're all spying on each other. None of us trust each other. It's all a game. I mean, this is the primeval sin in relation to God. The devil tells Eve, you shall not die. God is holding life for himself. He doesn't want to share his power with you. It's a power struggle. The most difficult problem that I have seen, and I, for whatever reason, I have gotten an interview into a lot of marriages. Okay. The most pervasive problem I've seen, it is very hard to convince both husband and wife that they're overreading their spouse's actions. Whatever they do is, well, just because I felt like saying it, right? Why did you say that? Well, because I felt like it. I was hurt. That's why I said this. Why did my spouse say that? Oh, because he or she was trying to gain leverage over me. It's always a power struggle, what one is saying to another person. This is what it means to have the inverse of faith. Eve is convinced that God is lying to her because he is trying to gain leverage in a power struggle. Same thing is said about Moses. Was it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out to die here? You have bad intentions. You're not really telling me what the deal is. The reason you're saying what you're saying is because you're a liar and you're trying to gain power. That, because we are the image of God, our relations to each other parallel our relation to God. And so the rupture in faith that happens between man and God happens between man and man and woman and woman and woman, and so on and so forth. And this extends to a very large scale. This is what the governing principle of all international relations. There are no friendships between nations. There are only partnerships. There's only common interests. I think it is true that nations have a responsibility, an obligation, the state rather, has an obligation to look after the interests of their own people before they look after the interests of others. Doesn't mean that looking after the interests of others is irrelevant or they have no obligation, but they have a preeminent obligation to their own people. Just like if you have 2 starving children, you can only feed one. It's morally obligatory to feed your own rather than the other, if that's the option set before you. Nevertheless, I think a fundamentally Christian world order is so different than the one that we imagine that it sounds like pie in the sky. But anybody who says, "Oh, you're too idealistic," shouldn't be taken seriously if that is the extent of their argument. Like, okay, none of us can talk about any improvement at all unless we have an idea of what it would look like to have a perfect system. What if nobody sinned? What would it look like if everybody was perfect? Okay, that's the ideal, right? The only way we can talk about whether we're doing better or worse is by talking about it relative to that ideal. So even if one will never realize the ideal, one can approach it to greater or lesser degrees, which is why we have to have an idea in our mind of what it would look like. So if somebody just says, oh, that's idealistic, that's not an argument, that's a name. It's kind of like that's Hegelian. I mean, well, who cares what you call it? You can call it whatever you'd like. Or that's neo-Kabbalistic. Well, call it whatever you'd like. The question is it true or false? So what would a Christian world order look like? Well, what God wants to do with mankind is to create a single human family unified in Christ that is both one and many, because God is one and many. He is one and three. Thus, the human family is one and many. It's both male and female. That's why let us create man in our image. The let us matches the plurality of male and female. Genesis chapter 11. Let us go down and scatter their tongues. In Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel is not only one language, it's also one lip. Okay, so there's a tower and a city. There's a lip and a language. That's 2 different things. Tower is the temple. It is the ladder to heaven, the link between the heavenly court and mankind. That's the lip. That's the God on whom you call. David says, I will not pour out their drink offerings of blood or take their name on my lip. Zephaniah 3 says that God will purify the lip of the nations so that they might call on the name of the Lord. Lip is that by which you call on the name of your respective God. That's the God in whom you trust. That's the God with whom you covenant. Language is that by which you interact with other human beings. So the God you choose determines the culture that you have. Cult and culture. There's a reason those words are related to each other, conceptually speaking. So in the book of Judges, when Israel goes after other gods, God gives them the culture, which emerges out of these various idolatrous deities. What happens when people worship devils? They get a devilish culture. What happens when people worship God? They get a divine culture. So what would it look like to actually have a family of nations who are healed by the government of Christ? I think as someone who believes in the success of the gospel, like Christ will be victorious over all nations in history, that his blessing will compound so that beatitude and obedience will be the norm and not the exception in history. I think that this is a very important and meaningful question. And I think what it means is, number one, nations will not be busybodies. Paul condemns busybodies. I think it's in Titus where he condemns busybodies. Don't be a busybody. Don't be constantly, fussed about, what other people are or aren't doing. Right? Nations do this all the time. They issue their stupid little condemnations of what a human rights situation in X country that, of course, it's not their own country. Attend to your own house first. Stop being so self-righteous and preachy. There is a such thing as patriotism is good, but of course it can go too far. And going too far is actually undermines patriotism itself. We are commanded to love our nation. I love my country. I love America. I will not leave. I love this country. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it means I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it like I'm proud of my family. Like I rejoice in the accomplishments of my brother. I rejoice in the accomplishments of my country. But if the country isn't identical to the state, and I think when we talk about Christian international relations, what would it look like for the nations to actually operate as a family? And that sounds so ridiculous because it seems so far from what we are used to. But it's not I, but the grace of God which is in me. St. Constantine the Great, he wrote a letter to the king of Persia. It's a really remarkable letter, inviting the king of Persia to bend his knee to the feet of Christ. It's a fundamentally different view of the world, where it is not that all nations are ontologically obligated to bow their knee to Rome, which was basically taken for granted, that the Roman state was the axis of the world, the hinge on which it turned. It was rather that all nations are meant to bend their knee to the feet of Christ. This was a sea change. And I think that if you're interested in how this kind of cashes out in detail, James Jordan has a book called The Bible and the Nations, which is quite good. James Jordan's very insightful. The Bible talks about boundaries. Like Israel has to ask the Edomites for permission before traversing through their land. Boundaries are predicated on the idea of consecration. Okay, so this is what property is based upon. So God owns everything. What that means is his buck stops with him. He determines the way that everything is going to end up in relation to each other. God has a stake in everything. We have delegated ownership from God. We're given dominion over the land. So we have a slice of land. We've got stuff that we own. And that means that we have the capacity and the power to change it in the manner that we see fit. We take it and we mold it according to an idea that we have in our mind, which is what God is doing during the 6 days of creation. Creates the heavens. That's the heavenly archetype. And then he creates the earth, which is a formless, void, and dark mass of water. During the 6 days, he forms, he fills, and he brightens it. First day he forms, second day he fills. The third day, or first day he brightens. The second day he forms, and the third day he fills. There are multiple ways that you can analyze the 6 days, but God is taking this raw material and he's shaping it. Water is the primordial element out of which everything else emerges, and God shapes it in the 6 days, and that is what we do as the image of God. That's what it means to have dominion. Now, there are mutually interpenetrating degrees of sovereignty and ownership, right? So to say that the state has the ability to tax you X amount means that there is a certain amount of property which is owed to them, right? So Joseph levies a 20% tax. Why 20%? Because in the Noahic covenant, the priesthood and the kingship are one office. Remember, Noah first offers sacrifice, then he is made king, then he's given the authority to exercise the death penalty. And that since the death penalty is the maximum penalty by the nature of the case, that means he's given authority for all other penalties. But the Romans talk about imperium as this is where imperium is given. So the Noahic covenant is something which appears in many nations in many different forms, and it's actually a wonderful lens through which to look at the kind of legal concepts across the world. I think showing its historicity. Someone needs to do a detailed study of that. But Joseph levies a 20% tax because in the Noahic covenant, you've got priest kings. That's why across the Gentile world, Pharaoh is the head of the cult. He's also the head of the state. In Israel, you differentiate these offices.
In Israel, you've got the king, you got the priest. Okay, you got the king, and then you have the head of the sanctuary. In the Gentile nations, those two offices are identified. By the way, I have been looking at various stepped pyramids across the world, and I have noticed that almost all of the ones that I've seen have 9 steps. I don't know if there's been any studies on this, but it's really interesting because the 9 steps recalls to me the 9 ranks of angels, and that's not an arbitrary correspondence as if the only thing that they share in common is the number 9. The reason that I associate those two is because the stepped pyramid, which belongs to the Noachic order, because it's everywhere. Okay, you look, the earliest Egyptian pyramid is a step pyramid. Mesoamerica has lots of step pyramids. India, step pyramids. China, step pyramids. It's because it's a ladder to heaven, and it is a representation of the world, an architectural representation of the cosmos. And it's a representation of the relation of heaven to earth in terms of a hierarchy wherein the king, who is the head of state and head of cult, the priest king, ascends and he goes into the inner sanctuary. So he enters into this mediating point. And it's at the New Year where he does this. So in China, it's the border sacrifice. In Babylon, it's the Babylonian New Year festival. In Mesoamerica, it's the New Year's festival. In Israel, it's the Day of Atonement. You enter into the heavenly sanctuary, and what you do is you offer the sacrifice in order to renew the continued existence of the world. That's the theology which undergirds it in Israel and among the nations, because it is a renewal of the Noachic covenant, where God has Noah offer the sacrifice, and he says, when he renews the covenant on the basis of the sacrifice, neither summer nor winter, day nor night, fall nor spring, harvest or planting won't stop before me. In other words, we're talking about the transition point. Just like Genesis 4, when does Cain and Abel offer their sacrifice? It's at the cutting off of the year. So it's not a random thing that it's a New Year's festival that we find. So the 9 steps here, in terms of the ascent of the heavenly council, it seems quite striking to me that there are 9 steps and across a variety of cultures. And just one of many examples of how the biblical view of the world, the biblical view of history, is actually the real true world. And we need to stop assuming that idolatry or paganism comes before the worship of the one true God. No, God is not against step pyramids. If you look at that text, this is Exodus 20. Exodus 20 is about the construction of the earth altar prior to the construction of the tabernacle. Okay, so the tabernacle was an exalted form of what they had before. Just like Adam was naked, but he was meant to be exalted. He was meant to be given clothing. So also is the human family meant to be exalted, meant to be vested with priestly garments. Israel was being taken back to square one because Israel was God's new planting, and it would incorporate all the other nations. So Israel went through this process. They kind of stepped back from what Noah had, and then they go through the process of being rejuvenated and growing again so that it might be a new human family out of which the nations will sprout. And that is why if you look at the book of Daniel, Daniel 2 says that there will be a stone cut without hands, and it will grow to fill the whole earth. Now, the stone cut without hands is an altar. An altar is a mountain. Ezekiel 40-48 actually calls the altar the holy mountain. So our Revelation chapter 21, it shows us the city of God. This is a representation of all creation filled with the divine presence. And the city of God is a pyramid, okay, because it has equal sides. There are only 2 shapes in 3 dimensions, which could possibly fit the dimensions of Revelation. And that's a pyramid, and that's a cube. It's a pyramid because there's a downhill flow of water there. So it is the whole earth become a holy mountain because the presence of God fills all creation. Is what's going on there. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next super chat. Oh, by the way, on reading recommendations as to the polytheistic, monotheistic issue, when Cordoban's book, In the Beginning God, that's a great one. Then I would recommend Michael Heiser's stuff. What's the book called? The Unseen Realm. I've got problems with things that he says there, but it's a very insightful book. Benjamin Sommer, I mentioned the appendix to his book, Bodies of God in the World of Ancient Israel. I think the appendix is quite a bit better than the book itself. The book depends a lot on historical criticism. Not lacking in value totally, but I wouldn't recommend it to people who aren't familiar with it. Okay. What do I say to people who use Matthew 12:40 to say that Jesus couldn't be crucified on a Friday? So I think my guess is that it's a 3 days and 3 nights passage. Let me just verify this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so a day and a night. It says like it's an idiomatic way of speaking. Puggy! Oh, darn it! I hate it when he goes up. Puggy, you're not supposed to go over there. Stop it. Sorry, Pug. Sorry. Oh. I know. Oh, Pug. Puggy. Hold on, Bug. He's a little rascal, that's what he is. Hey, Patrick Rooney, if you don't like it, we can be friends. But I mean, seriously, man, I mean, what am I supposed to do? You know, I'm gonna answer every question here in depth, but okay, yeah, I love you. We all love each other. Sorry about the interruptions. Okay, anyway, what was I talking? Oh, yes, the day and night. It's an idiom. Okay, so if you look at, I think it's in the Babylonian Talmud. It might be in the Jerusalem Talmud or the Mishnah, but there's a passage in there where it talks about, I think it's an onah is what it's called. A day and a night is considered equivalent to the onah, and any part of the day or the night can be called the onah, because you got to think about it not as a sentence or a phrase, but as a single word. A day and night. Day and night. Just like I would say 3 days from now, I might mean today, tomorrow, and the day after, right? Even though it's 3 letters, day, it's 1 word. Same, by the same token, day and night is an idiom. It represents a single period of time. Okay. So Jesus uses this phrase because he's connecting his own ministry with that of Jonah. Now, the reason that Jesus connects his ministry with that of Jonah, there's lots of stuff, really cool stuff here. First of all, Jonah means dove. Okay, so the book of Jonah connects in some detail with the story of the flood. Really cool passage in Jonah, which shows you what I'm talking about when I talk about the Gentiles understanding who God is. Let me just read you the text. First, he flees from the presence of the Lord. He flees from the presence of the Lord. This is an allusion to what Adam does. There's a lot of Adam language here. So Adam is sentenced to death. Jonah enters into the death of Adam, and then he emerges out of that because he's resurrected from the dead. Just as the oceans are described as the waters under the earth. So you think about land, and then the sea is below the land. Well, the sea is also then corresponds to the grave, because the grave is conceived of as under the earth. So you go into the sea, you're going into the grave. You come out of the sea, you're coming out of the grave. It's a death and resurrection. Jonah is said to go into a deep sleep. The word there for deep sleep is the same word that is used of Adam going into deep sleep when Eve is born. Now, the specific parable here is of Israel's exile. Jonah goes into the great fish, just like Israel will go into the great city. Just like Jonah, at the end of the book, God causes a tree to grow and overshadow him to protect him from the heat of the sun. Point is, Jonah goes into Assyria. He preaches the word of God. Or Assyrians who repent, they obey the word of God. That means when the northern kingdom goes into exile there are going to be people who are faithful to God, who know the God of heaven, who worship him, and will give them safe haven. Same thing happens in Babylon. God sends Daniel ahead of the Judahites so that he can prepare a place for the Judahite exiles. He sends Daniel ahead. Daniel becomes a counselor to King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is baptized with water from heaven.
not baptized in the Christian sense, of course, but we're told that over 7 periods of time, Nebuchadnezzar is soaked with water from heaven. This is Daniel chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar undoubtedly is in heaven right now. He converts. James Jordan makes an interesting argument that Belshazzar actually also is in heaven. Belshazzar, the story in Daniel 5, Belshazzar's mother is the one who tells him to call upon Daniel. And there's this repeated phrase, "O king, live forever," in the book. And then when Belshazzar is told that he's being condemned, that his kingdom is being taken out of his hand, he doesn't reject it. He doesn't complain. What he does is he gives what he promised to Daniel, and he goes and submits to his death. So it's certainly, I think it's a very interesting argument. I think I lean toward thinking he's right, that Belshazzar died a repentant man. God snatches a lot of people at the very end. I was talking about Jonah. So Jonah goes into the great city, which is Nineveh, and the great fish, great city. These two things are in parallel. And the reason that he is upset that he's being sent to preach to the nations, because he knows the prophecy of Deuteronomy 32, right? That when Israel goes into idolatry, okay, you're going to worship no gods. Well, God is going to take no people. He's going to start converting the Gentiles. That pattern begins here in the book of Jonah. Jonah is a dove. The Spirit of God blows over the waters. The Gentiles are signified by the sea. That's why Jonah goes into the sea to signify Israel going into the nations. That's why in the book of Daniel, when we talk about the 4 Gentile kingdoms, what we're being, the text starts with the wind blowing over the waters. Daniel 7 is given as a creation week, okay? Daniel 7 has 7 instances of, "and I looked." And the chapter divisions in Daniel are quite good. So Daniel 7 is actually the 7th part of the book of Daniel. And so the book of Daniel has 10 parts, and chapters 10 to 12 are the last part. Chapter 7 corresponds, among other things, to 7 creation days. Chapter 7 is a recapitulation of creation week. So that's why it begins with the winds blowing over the water, just as the Spirit blew over the water in Genesis 1. And Jonah is like the Spirit who blowing over the Gentile water because he has the Spirit dwelling in him as a prophet. He goes to the Assyrians, and the Assyrians' conversion causes changes in the Gentile world. Faithfulness, as we see in Deuteronomy, faithfulness gives you cultural power. Right? So faithfulness, since God wired the world, obedience to God will naturally be more productive. And nations who apostatize effectively live off of borrowed time. They've got a lot of energy that's taken from their earlier period of obedience, but it gives them power to do more. So if they rebel, they're even worse. Assyria has more power because of what Jonah did. Jonah goes into the Gentile sea, he's spit out again. That signifies Jesus. Jesus is the one who takes the curse of exile on himself. The earth is not 14,000 years old. The earth is 5,952 years old, approximately. Exactly. And I'm not kidding. I really am that nuts. What was I saying? Oh, I forget what I was saying. Oh, you know what I started this with? I started with this with talking about the God of heaven. So when they talk to Jonah, when the wind is going on the sea, so if the Spirit blows on the sea, it causes a storm. Remember how earlier I was asked whether the God is the storm God? Storms are what creatively reshape the world. So God blows on the sea. He causes changes, and that is signified in the storm that comes on Jonah when he is hiding on this ship. And they tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? Of what people are you? He said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, what is this you have done? That is the same phrase that God uses when he speaks to Adam and Eve. What is this you have done? The Hebrew is identical. if I recall correctly, and I think I've looked this up specifically. What is this you have done? The same thing is there in Judges as well. What is this you have done? Why are they so worried about this? Because everyone knows that there is a supreme God. Okay, so the nations might worship lesser deities, but they consistently have a concept of the supreme creator God, right? Adam was the first human being. There were not other people. I know some people suggested, well, there must have been other people for Cain to build a city. Well, no. The reason that Cain builds a city is because this takes place 128 years after the creation of the world. That's a lot of time to have lots of children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. People lived longer in those days, so there's enough people to build a city with. Who did Abel marry, or who did Cain marry? He married his sister. I mean, Abram. I mean, this is the thing. People say, oh, that's crazy. Well, no, we know Abram married his half-sister. This is not crazy. We are given explicit testimony that the marriage of one's siblings was not actually banned until Sinai. Okay, so God impels the human family outwards. So things that are appropriate earlier in one's life are not appropriate later in one's life. So yeah, of course, Cain married his sister. So did Abraham. Anyway. Okay. Andrew, I'm actually, I answered the question about Matthew 12:40, basically saying day and night is an idiom. That idiom is documented in Jewish literature, and it's like us using the word day to refer to any part of one day. So you have to consider day and night basically with like hyphens between them. It's as if it is one word. So any part of a day is a day and a night. And the reason Jesus uses this specific language is to connect the text with Jonah, because Jesus' resurrection is analogized to Jonah, because Jesus takes the curse of exile onto himself, because exile is separation of Israel from their land. Man is made out of land. Man is like a plot of land. Man belongs and is attached to the land where he is born. And when you're separated from your land, you are cut off from yourself. You're cut off from yourself, and death is separation. It's a separation of soul and body. I want to see Puggy. It's a little pug. You're cut off from yourself. And the exile of Israel is thus a tearing in two. It is a symbol of death, because death is a tearing in two. And so Jonah's going into exile ahead of his people, being thrown into the sea, which is the waters under the earth, like the grave is under the earth. It's a symbol of death. That's why he goes into a deep sleep, just as Adam goes into a deep sleep, just as Abraham goes into a deep sleep when his animals are cut in two before they're unified back together by the Spirit of God. And then Jonah comes out of the water again. He's vomited up on the land. And when he's vomited up on the land as a dove, his name means dove. He's like the Spirit. He has the Spirit dwelling in him. He bears witness to the nations, just like throughout the period of the return from exile, Israel is bearing witness to the nations. Daniel, right-hand man to King Nebuchadnezzar and to King Cyrus, who is called King Darius in Daniel 6 and following. The Septuagint identifies him with Cyrus. The reason he's called Darius the Mede is because Cyrus ruled over a Medo-Persian kingdom. And we know kings would have multiple throne names. So it makes perfect sense that he would have a Median throne name as well as a Persian throne name. And the reason this Median throne name is emphasized in the book of Daniel is because Isaiah prophesied the conquest of Babylon by the Medes. And Daniel is very interested in the fulfillment of prophecy. So he, of course, calls Cyrus by his Median name. At the end of Daniel chapter 6, we're told that Cyrus and Darius the Mede are the same person. It's the year of Darius the Mede, even the year of Cyrus the Persian. That's one way of translating it. I think that's probably the correct way. So in Jonah, when Jonah tells the Gentiles that he worships the God of heaven, they know who he's talking about. Because remember, God of heaven is a well-known phrase. That's what the Chinese, in ancient China, Shangdi, the emperor of heaven. Sometimes they just call him Tian, heaven. In Africa, it says the God of heaven. Okay, the Maasai today call their creator the God of heaven. Australian Aboriginals, God of heaven. Mesoamerica, heart of heaven. Near East, Most High God. India, Deus, or shining Father, i.e. the Father in heaven. Rome, EU pater, or Father in heaven. So this is a very widespread title for God among the Gentiles. And when Jonah says, I serve the God of heaven, this is a prophet of the supreme creator, who they might not worship. They worship the guy who's kind of down the chain of command, but they know he's there, and they know the buck stops with him. It's a very serious thing to rebel against the God of heaven, and they're quite aware of that. Okay. Matthew, well, how many people are born in 128 years? Well, the thing is, what you have to understand is that people aren't dying at 80 years old, right? People are still alive. There's enough time there for children and grandchildren, especially when you consider that people are having lots and lots of children. Okay. Now, how big is a city? We don't know how big the city was. The reality of the situation is that we're told that Adam was made from the dust of the ground. We're told that he was the first human being. And we're told that 128 years later, Cain made a city. There's nothing in the text there which requires us to think that there were some other people who weren't mentioned. And that is why there's not a single commentator who ever drew that conclusion from the text until Darwin, or until Lyell, at least. It's not there. Arabian Princess. What do I think of Shabir Ali and his debate tactics? I don't. Tactics. He was very cordial. I think he behaved very respectfully, both before and after the debate. We had some discussion over email, and maybe it's a philosophical difference. I don't think. Well, I'll just say my impression of him was, as a person, he was a gentleman. He's very cordial. People, when they make an argument which is not valid, I don't think the first thing we should jump to is, oh, well, they're being disingenuous. I think even when people give arguments that they kind of know are lacking in substance, and I don't think Shabir actually presented any arguments that he already thought were lacking in substance. He was quite interested in some of the books that I had mentioned, and I'm going to take him at his word there. People, are deceive themselves more than they deceive anybody else. So I don't think we should be quick to jump to the conclusion that other people are kind of Machiavellians. They're really lying to us. And I'm not saying you're saying that about Shabir, but I thought he's a nice guy. I thought it was a good, cordial debate. Okay. Give me a second, guys. Mm-hmm. Guys. I'm going to get the next super chat in a couple moments. You can probably hear the dog. That's Puggy snoring. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I see.
Okay. Let's see. Someone asked, let me make sure my sound is on. Shining Diamond, I have a series of videos on epiphatic theology. Okay. Could I explain Mark 9:49? If your hand causes you to sin, etc. Jesus says everyone will be seasoned with fire. Every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Let me take a look at context, make sure I understand the nature of the question. Everyone will be salted with fire. Okay, so this actually looks back towards the use of salt in the Old Covenant liturgical system. Now, salt will dry you out, just like fire will do. So salt and fire are associated with each other. They correspond to each other. So in the ascension offering, the entire offering is burned up. And what that means is the presence of God comes and it assimilates the entirety of the thing which is being offered into the presence of God. So when an Israelite wants to begin his liturgical process, he begins with an ascension offering, because by leaning on the animal, he identifies his own person with the animal and he ascends thereby into the presence of God. To talk about everybody being seasoned with fire, every sacrifice being seasoned with salt, well, Jesus, as the new Joshua, devotes the whole world to complete destruction. Right? So he kills everyone, but those who are baptized rise from the dead. And that's the key point. Everybody dies with Christ. Okay? We say that one man has died, therefore all have died, Paul says. That's why everybody will be resurrected from the grave. The question is whether by the Spirit we are harmonized with the will of the Father through Christ, so that in the resurrection of the body, we will be integrated into the life of God, so that we will become a whole and integrated person. Mr. Heavy said, what should we say about saints like Catherine the Great with no historicity until 100 years hereafter and very legendary hagiography? I would say that if you look at recent saints, if you look at saints who are for whom we have direct attestation, the very same kinds of things are reported about them that are reported about saints who are alleged to be filled with legendary accretions. So if you look at something like the martyrdom of Polycarp, the very same kind of strange miracles are reported there from firsthand witnesses that are reported in other texts, which are alleged to be legendary on account of the strangeness of the miracles described. So I just have a great deal of historical deference to the hagiography. I'm not saying it's inerrant, but I do think we should show it a great deal of deference, because the Eucharist is the means by which we remember Christ and God remembers us in Christ. And it is in the Eucharist that the whole liturgical tradition is born. Every day is a feast day of some saint or another. So we remember God in Christ. He remembers us in Christ. And that is why we remember and commemorate the saints. Commemorate. You can hear memory inside that word. We commemorate the saints because they are in the body of Christ. And so I think that this holds true for history. And I think that there's really no reason that we should take for granted or assume that, a miracle or a strange miracle gives us any reason to think that what's going on is legendary, because there's no correspondence between the X being farther removed from the time in question or X being closer to the time in question and a growth in legend in terms of the hagiography, because St. John Maximovich, very same kind of miracles are reported about him that are found in the ancient texts. I mean, in modern accounts of martyrdom, in some of the very early accounts of martyrdom, we hear about a martyr going to his death, and then someone who is a pagan converts on the spot because of the witness of the person being martyred. And this is the kind of thing which you will think, oh, that must be legendary, but actually the same thing happens today. Same thing is reported in contemporary sources. This is one of the ways the Spirit just works. So I would say, as someone who has studied at obviously, there's always more to learn, and obviously, I'm not like Prince of academics, but I have studied the ancient world at on a professional level. One of my degrees is in classics. It's an MA in classics. It's from that's what I did at Notre Dame. I know that a lot of the arguments about the early hagiography is actually not true. That things which are said are to be historically implausible actually are not historically implausible. I wrote a long response to a friend of mine that unfortunately I've lost. I wish I would have made it into a blog post if I hadn't lost it, but it's about a particular saint where I think we could use it as a test case. I'll see if I can find it at some point. What is my view of the Book of Mormon? I think it's false. I have a series in the Book of Mormon, actually, and I'm going to continue that series going forward. I don't know that Joseph Smith seems to have been, to some degree, sincere. Now, I say this as someone who knows more about Mormonism than anybody I've ever met who doesn't have a connection with Mormonism, right? So there are people who know more about Mormonism than me and Mormon history than me, but they usually grow up in Utah. They have family members who are Mormons or whatever. I really enjoy Mormon history. When I look at Joseph Smith, I think that he believed that he was channeling divine revelation in one way or another. But very clearly, if we look at the book, the question is, what production context is it earmarked by? The question is, does it bear the markers of the 19th century or the markers of the ancient Near Eastern and Mesoamerican world? Clearly, it bears the markers of the 19th century. So if the book can be explained equally in terms of both Mesoamerican and 19th century worlds, then it's simply simpler to situate it in the 19th century. One doesn't necessarily need to have an explanation for how it was produced in order to say that it was produced in the 19th century. And I actually have a series of articles on this. It's on examiningmormonism.tumblr.com. I have a blog where I've written on this. I've written a lengthy response to John Clark, who's an LDS scholar. He's a Mesoamerican archaeologist. He's a very serious scholar, but he doesn't understand the world of the 19th century. And that explains why he thinks that things are implausible in Joseph Smith's world when actually they are exactly what we would expect someone in Joseph Smith's situation to produce. For example, Joseph Smith, Book of Mormon, talked a lot about universalism. Well, that's a flashpoint of theological controversy in the 19th century in upstate New York. It is not. And it doesn't even make sense in BC Mesoamerica. Okay? The debate wouldn't have been had in those terms. The same thing is true across, there are characters in the Book of Mormon who are supposed to live 200 years before Christ in Central America, according to the modern LDS view, who are arguing like deists. I mean, it's just much more plausible that this is located in the 19th century and not in ancient Mesoamerica. I actually think those arguments are much stronger than archaeological arguments because the archaeology in Central America is so limited at this point. And because the geography of the Book of Mormon allows for a lot of mutually exclusive reconstructions, and I don't think it's situated in Mesoamerica. I think it's meant to be a hemispheric geography. That is, it's supposed to take place across all of North and South America. The reason that the distances that are described in the Book of Mormon don't match the real distances in North-South America, because it's not a real history. It's something which comes from the mind of Joseph Smith, I think. I think it may have connection with the Spalding manuscript. I think I've written a bit on this elsewhere. There's some really weird stuff in terms of the history of the Spalding manuscript and paranormal stuff that was going on with Sidney Rigdon. I have a kind of nascent theory in my mind that I haven't written yet on how it was produced and how it relates to the Spalding manuscript. But we know that Sidney Rigdon, he lied about his connection with the Spalding manuscript. And it's very, there's some weird stuff, I think, that suggests Spalding has a role in this story, but it's not the kind of traditional Spalding theory. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, this is Mormon history stuff. So yeah, if you want more on that, I've talked about it in my series in the Book of Mormon. Could I explain the curse of the Torah that Paul talks about in Galatians, its relation
to not only Deuteronomy 17 or 27, but also Christ being described as a curse, it seems weird that he is a curse even though he is innocent. Okay, so the curse is the curse of exile. Deuteronomy 27 and 28 provides the curses of the Torah being the curse of exile. And exile is death. Okay, the first exile in the Bible is Adam's being cut off from the tree of life. So that's the exile, which is death. Death is being separated from oneself. Death is being cut in two. Death is being ripped from your body. And resurrection is being reintegrated in glorified form. So Israel is a corporate Adam, and that is why Jesus, as the Messianic King of Israel who represents the whole nation, is simultaneously the last Adam by the same principle. Now, the reason that he takes the curse, even though he is innocent, is because by entering into the curse of death, he who is blessed by nature and has the whole divine glory intrinsic to his person communicates life to death and thus undoes death. So I have a video on the Gospel of the King, which is about how this happens. Effectively, what goes on is in the history of Israel, God takes one nation and through his word, he develops the nation into two distinct threads, one of which is increasingly accursed. It becomes worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Jesus says the wheat and the tares, they go together. It becomes worse and worse and worse. One of which is the remnant, and they become more and more educated in the way of God. So that remnant of Israel, they are the root onto which the Gentile branches are grafted. Isaiah 27 says, one by one I will glean you out, O children of Israel. Isaiah 27 says, Jacob shall take root, Israel shall blossom forth, put forth shoots, and fill the whole world with fruit. And then the rest, whom Paul calls the rest in Romans 11, they are the means by which sin becomes sinful beyond all. Has designed a trap. He's drawn in all of the forces of evil onto this one spot so that when they attack Jesus, they're trapped. They attach themselves to Jesus, but Jesus, being divine, cannot be divided. And so because they attach themselves to Jesus, Jesus draws them down, puts the curse on them, and then is raised from the dead in a glorified and transfigured body. So I have a video called The Cross of Christ and All the New Testaments. And that video goes through this in some detail. If you want to see the way that this works, Isaiah chapter 6 talks about the purpose of Isaiah's prophetic calling. It's to make Israel more blind and more deaf. In other words, make sin sinful beyond all measure. Cause those who are committed in rebellion against God to realize the full effects of their sin. Because sin is self-destructive. The only way that it can be effective is by piggybacking off good. God forces sin to be fully itself and thus to destroy itself. The wicked shall fall into their own net, but I alone escape, says the psalmist. And the way that he does that corporately is by forcing them again and again to confront the word of God. And every time they confront the word of God, they become more and more hardened against him. And that makes them act more and more foolishly. You know, you get someone, you rile someone up, right? And they act more and more foolish. They're more self-destructive. Their mind is less clear. God, through his word, he blinds the blind in Israel and opens the eyes of those who have ears to hear. So Isaiah 29 talks about the completion of this process. You know, in Genesis 15, it says about the Canaanites, their iniquity is not yet full. Okay, in Daniel chapter 8, we hear that about the process of development, which comes to its climax in the Messianic age. Okay, the iniquity of the rebels in Israel becomes full. So that's why Isaiah 29 says the eyes of the prophets will be sealed. Okay? The sealing of vision and prophecy. That is quoted in Daniel chapter 9. In Daniel chapter 9, it describes the sealing of vision and prophet as something which will happen at the climax of the 70 weeks. And that's why Jesus in the Gospels quotes Isaiah chapter 6. He quotes Isaiah 6 about what the word of God does in Israel. And he is the one who completes that task. He draws the forces of sin onto the cross. He destroys them on the cross. He leaves them there. And then he is resurrected from the grave so that we can leave everything which must be left behind. And we go with all those things which are meant to go into the world to come in Christ. Okay. So that is going to be, I'll comment on the last super chat, which wasn't really a question, but I'll make comment on it. I'll comment on that, but that will be all for tonight. Just think this. I might have another live stream this week. We'll see. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the debate. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your support. I appreciate your prayers. As I said, I feel pretty good about the way that it went down. I appreciate Shabir's cordial spirit. Thought he was, a gentleman. I hope that I came across well as well. I ask for your continued prayers. So Leonard de Jaguar says there is a pre-iconoclast image with both Saint Christopher and Saint George killing a dragon. Speaking of that, I will make the Cabane Pajot talk happen. Yeah, Jonathan Pajot is a really interesting guy. I haven't actually read or seen much of his stuff at all, but he's come to many of the same conclusions that I have, apparently from very different sources. So it's just really interesting that we converge on so many points when we're getting it from very different places. So I really would like to have a conversation with him in public or otherwise or both at some point. So yeah. Okay. Let me see if anyone has said anything that I wanted to comment on. Okay. Oh yeah. So I imagine there are some new people here who have encountered me through my debate with Shabir. So I do have a Patreon. There's some exclusive content that's provided. I like to provide most of the content to a general audience, but there's some videos that I've given to patrons only. But at the third tier, I guarantee an hour of one-on-one conversation every month if you take advantage of that. So some people have said it's been very helpful. So if you want to support this content, please consider becoming a patron or a member. I offer YouTube membership. It's more expensive because YouTube takes a higher cut, but I will link the Patreon right here. And if you're interested in continuing to support my work, please consider becoming a patron if you're in a financially good situation. If you're not in a financially good situation, if you're struggling for money, please do not become a patron. I really don't want you to stretch yourself to do that. If that's something that interests you, please consider that. And I want to welcome everyone who's just come to this channel for the first time. I really appreciate your watching, appreciate your participation here. And by God's will, we will have more conversations in the future. So there we go. Mm-hmm.